Chapter 241. Just as she was having a hard time calming herself down, the bedroom door gently opened, and a gentle and virtuous lady in a beautiful dress walked in with light steps. "Daphne, it's time for you to rest." The noblewoman walked over, hugged her shoulders, and pulled her to the front of the gorgeous and exquisite bed. "Hurry up and rest. We still have to hide in the palace tomorrow morning." After sending her mother off gently, Daphne heaved a faint sigh and closed the door. As soon as she turned around, she was greeted by a pair of strange, dark green eyes. He gently laid the girl, who was wearing a thin nightgown, on the soft bed. She turned around and said, "I have hypnotized her. She won't wake up until tomorrow morning. Do what you want to do." A tall figure walked out from the shadows in the corner of the room and quietly came to the bed. He gently lifted the nightgown of the girl and only stopped when her waist was exposed. Grim stretched out his right index finger and quickly drew a strange fire rune on the girl's belly that did not have the slightest bit of fat. The entire rune flickered with fluorescent light and faintly overflowed with a dark red, evil radiance. After 2 or 3 breaths, it slowly faded away and submerged into the girl's belly. "It's done." Grim closed his eyes and sensed the hidden fire rune. He nodded in satisfaction. "Let's go back." Yezi gently restored the girl's nightgown to its original state and covered her with a soft velvet quilt. Then she turned around and left. Grim silently snuck out of the villa. Before turning into a dark alley, he looked back and sighed. He then pulled up his hood to cover his face and silently blended into the shadows in front of him. Perhaps this was the power of a prophet. When faced with a radiant knight, he could only think about how to kill his opponent in a head-on confrontation. But when such a difficult problem fell into the hands of the powerless prophet Masi, he could find another way to solve the problem. He could use the relatives of the enemy to lure them away at the crucial moment. This way, a dangerous battle could be avoided. Lions and tigers only spoke with their claws and teeth, but foxes were cunning and intelligent. Grim finally understood how Prophet Moss managed to survive under the watchful eyes of the Demon Hunter Knights. The reason why Mars was willing to come into contact with him was probably because he saw that he could benefit from the power of destiny. It was impossible for him to obtain these basic magic books from the hands of a great wizard. Due to the difference in the laws between the 2 planes, it was impossible for these books to be completely applicable to spellcasters from the plane of knights. However, with such a comparable system, it could save them hundreds of years of arduous exploration. Perhaps with their current strength and accumulation of knowledge, in another 100 or 200 years, they would be able to establish a preliminary spellcaster advancement system that was completely suitable for this plane. But how would this affect Grim? Whether they would continue to follow Wizard Salubo or create trouble on their own, what did that have to do with Grim? Perhaps it was because both sides had mutual needs, but there was no direct conflict of interest, that Prophet Moss was willing to fully cooperate with Grim, even if he had to pay a price. Grim dared to guarantee that if he really wanted to kill him, that skinny old man would instantly disappear in front of him, and he would never be able to find him again. After that, Grim would probably have to think of a way to avoid the pursuit of the higher-ups of the Demon Hunters. As expected, the prophet profession's use of power had a wondrous aspect that was difficult for outsiders to understand. Perhaps he did not have any power himself, but he could reasonably use all the power around him to achieve his goals. The people whom he borrowed power from would often think that it was the choice of fate and would willingly be used by him. This way of using power had indeed attracted Grim's interest. However, when he thought about the condition of controlling the power of destiny was to lose all his own power, Grim could not help but want to retreat. Instead of slowly weaving a net around the enemy and waiting for them to throw themselves into the trap, it was far better to burn the enemy with fire and turn the enemy into ashes. It was much more satisfying and efficient. As expected, the more violent and hot-blooded fire elemental wizard was more suitable for him. The next afternoon, every day at this time, it was almost always the time when the dragons would attack. Hence, when the loud dragon roars resounded in the distant sky, the remaining citizens of Scandra City immediately hid and waited for the dragons to attack. The weather was pleasant, and the sky was bright. The grade 2 green dragon Caesar spread his wings and flew across the forest with the three little ones behind him, gliding quickly along the undulating mountains and forests. It cannot be helped. The three little ones behind him were only grade 1 green dragons, and in his eyes, they were still naughty children who only knew how to play around. Traveling with a bunch of curious and playful fellows who had just grown claws and fangs was quite a psychological burden for it. But what could he do? There were 1 to 200 human cities on the Night's continent, and it would take a lot of time and effort to harvest them all before the Dragon Valley was relocated. Those strong adult green dragons had to travel tens of thousands of miles to plunder human cities all day long. In comparison, it was already a very easy task for it to lead a few dragon babies to a familiar territory thousands of miles away to gain some experience and sharpen the claws and teeth of the dragon whelps. Although they were dragon babies, in the eyes of humans, these little green dragons were already super terrifying and peerless demons. Their heads and tails were 5 meters long, and their wings were 4 meters wide when spread. Ferocious and terrifying fangs, thick hind limbs, sharp dragon claws, and that inviolable and terrifying dragon aura. Only in the eyes of adult green dragons could they be regarded as small and tender babies. As the dragons moved forward, Caesar's body moved forward slightly, and he looked down at the forest beneath him proudly. An abundant dragon aura spread across the land. Under Caesar's fierce gaze, the entire forest was in a mess. Countless birds and beasts hurriedly crawled out of their nests and fled into the distance without looking back. For a moment, the forest was filled with birds and beasts, as if it was the end of the world. The three young green dragons behind him were indescribably excited. They imitated Caesar and stretched out their necks and roared. Their crisp roars echoed throughout the forest. Suddenly, a little green dragon at the back of the group turned its head in one direction, raised its nose, and sniffed a few times. Then it flapped its wings excitedly and swooped down quickly. The birds and ferocious beasts in the jungle became even more panicked. All kinds of animals howled, and the ancient trees swayed from the impact of the fleeing beasts. The sound of branches breaking in the air was even more incessant. It was as if the doomsday was approaching. In the midst of this chaos, the little green dragon's thick hind claws sank deep into the back of a razor boar the size of a calf. In the next moment, its sharp fangs bit down on the neck of the razor boar. Two figures, one big and one small, rolled and fought in the dense forest. The rapid rolling of their huge bodies flattened a large area of the shrubs. Although the razor boar was fierce and violent by nature, and was considered an extremely terrifying and violent beast in the forest, it could only become prey in the face of an overlord of the sky, like the green dragon. It was the same even if it encountered a little green dragon that was less than 100 years old. Just as the little green dragon bit its prey to death and lowered its body to tear at the wild boar's fat hind leg, strong winds howled in the forest above its head, and the green dragon Caesar's sinister and terrifying body appeared again. Little Chelsea, don't be greedy. There's a human city in front of us waiting for us to visit. The little green dragon was happily gorging itself and couldn't bear to give up on the delicacy in its mouth. It roared at Caesar a few times and then lowered its head to continue eating. Looking at the other two restless green dragons, Caesar roared with a headache. Remember, don't stop for too long. We'll go to that human city first. Remember to follow us later. After saying this, the wind howled, and it circled around with the other two green dragons before flapping its wings and flying away. In the blink of an eye, it had crossed the hill in the distance and disappeared over the other side of the mountain. On a low cliff a mile away, 6 figures wrapped in black cloaks were silently watching the scene that had just happened. "It's done, Lord Grim." Prophet Moss was still as weak as ever. He held onto a long staff that was far taller than him and said in a low voice, "That little fellow has fallen for our trap. We can move now." Upon hearing Prophet Mossy's words, a few figures took off their cloaks and revealed their lean bodies, which were either leather armor or cloth robes. They jumped off the short cliff and quickly made their way to the little green dragon's feeding area. Grimm slowly pulled down his hood and nodded at Prophet Moss. "Your abilities have truly amazed me. I hope our cooperation will have a happy ending." After saying this, Grimm's figure was suddenly engulfed in a huge torch that soared into the sky. There was a loud bang. Grimm's figure disappeared from where he was. Then, the forest in the distance burst into flames, and a tall man, made of fire, suddenly appeared there, roaring as he charged at the little green dragon. The sudden explosion of the fire waves raged on the short cliff, but all the flames and shock waves were isolated by a transparent protective shield. A young woman with light blue patterns on her cheeks stood in front of Prophet Moss. She raised her hands high, and the transparent barrier was supported by her. Is he doing this on purpose? He clearly needs our help, but he's still so unfriendly to us? The young girl asked angrily while stabilizing the energy output in her hands. It doesn't matter if he's doing it on purpose or not. Prophet Moss shook his head slightly and sighed. He's a sensible person, and he can see very clearly that we both need each other's help. So, it's a fair trade, and it doesn't matter who's asking for help. So, he's trying to take us down a notch? Not really. This is actually the true nature of Magi. Although Magi claim to be a group that pursues knowledge, they can't change their evil, cruel, and dark nature. They believe in knowledge, but they're not humble. They're knowledgeable, but they're not kind. To be more precise, the reason why the Magi world has become so powerful is because they've constantly relied on plundering other planes and worlds to grow. Then can we still escape their control in the future? Chapter 242. While the two in the distance were still sighing, the battle in front of them had already begun. As he strode towards the battlefield, Grimm's burly body, which was originally 2 meters tall, had grown to more than 3 meters. Violent and ferocious elemental flames erupted from all over his body, turning him into a terrifying flaming man in the blink of an eye. A thick and tough lava armor appeared from the endless void, quickly wrapping around the flaming man. Grimm's footsteps became heavier, but the scarlet flames had become more intense, faintly tinged with a dark red hue. In the distant forest, the little green dragon that was gorging on its meal stopped biting and raised its head, vigilantly watching the terrifying figure that was already 100 meters away from it. It had seen many beasts and monsters in the forest, but this was the first time it had seen a creature with such a form. A humanoid creature? In its shallow and simple mind, the human form was always associated with weakness and cowardice, and it had never seen such a ferocious and terrifying humanoid creature before. Unexpectedly, the opponent was not afraid of its dragon aura, and even dared to provoke it. The little green dragon vaguely felt that something was wrong, and it roared angrily. It spread its wings and flapped them rapidly, preparing to soar into the sky. But just as the little green dragon spread its wings and was about to soar, Grimm's tall, flaming figure in the distance suddenly paused and disappeared on the spot. In the next second, the ring of fire on the little green dragon's back exploded, and Grimm's huge body smashed down with a majestic fist. A muffled thud sounded. The little green dragon howled miserably and fell to the ground. Before landing on the ground, the little green dragon nimbly flipped its body and faced Grimm. Its thick hind legs and sharp front claws instantly tore the lava armor in front of Grimm's chest into pieces. Terrifyingly high-temperature flames gushed out from the cracks in the lava armor, and the little green dragon's claws sizzled. Grimm's heavy lava iron fist rapidly pounded the little green dragon's head. But the little green dragon didn't care at all. Enduring the pain, it crazily dug at Grimm's chest with its fangs and claws, as if it wouldn't stop until its heart was dug out. As the lava armor shattered, Grimm's body also suffered great damage. He roared angrily, and the elemental flames on his body mixed with the fire barrier. The temperature of the flames began to rise, almost to the point where it could melt the iron pillars. The little green dragon and the Balrog that Grimm had transformed into were entangled together. The soaring temperature made the little green dragon feel as if it was immersed in terrifying magma. Terrifyingly high temperature gushed in through the gaps of its scales and the wounds on its body, incessantly burning its body and flesh. It felt like it was about to be roasted. The little green dragon twisted and struggled frantically. Finally, by rolling on the ground, it used its thick hind legs to kick Grim away, then followed up with a tail strike in the air. Grim's huge flaming body turned into a ball of fire, smashing through 3 tall ancient trees and falling into the bushes. The little green dragon struggled to turn its body over. The scales that had hugged the Balrog were all roasted red and white, and the pungent smell of burnt flesh and black smoke filled the air. The little green dragon lowered its body in pain, letting its burning body stick to the pitch-black soil. Only then did it feel a little better. It angrily stared at the place where the ball of fire was rising, and its keen senses collected every movement in the bushes. There was more than one enemy. That burning man was undoubtedly the most terrifying one. In the other 3 directions, the little green dragon also sensed that 3 groups of elemental auras were quickly gathering. Spellcasters. It was those evil spellcasters. The little green dragon couldn't help but panic. From birth until now, the little green dragon had been taught many things, and the descriptions of evil spellcasters were the most terrifying. If it was already an adult, its dragon scales that had greatly increased its elemental resistance might be able to resist terrifying spellcasters. But now, it was only a little green dragon that was close to adulthood, and its magic resistance was far from being able to ignore elemental attacks. The little green dragon didn't dare to wait any longer. Its thick and sharp hind legs stomped on the ground, and its membranous wings, which had a few holes in them, flapped rapidly. It planned to return to the safe skies first. But just as it rose, before it could reach the top of the trees, the dense vines of the nearby tall, ancient trees coiled over like long snakes, binding its huge dragon wings in an instant. Although most of the vines were torn apart by the powerful dragon wings, the little green dragon couldn't control its crooked body, and once again fell miserably. Just as it fell on the hard soil, a violent roar came from the bushes, and a tall, fierce, barbarian humanoid arched its body and rushed over. There was no explanation, no dialogue. A green dragon and a humanoid crashed into each other, and then began to bite and wrestle like ferocious beasts. Asking spellcasters to fight like warriors was undoubtedly a huge insult to the spellcaster profession. But in order to prevent the little green dragon from returning to the sky again, both Grim and Cobalt, who had transformed into a barbarian giant, could only reluctantly use their bodies to keep the little green dragon on the ground. Just as the two were fighting in the jungle, the vines on the trees and the bushes and thorns on the ground quickly wrapped around the little green dragon under the control of the girl Hua, desperately restraining the little green dragon's limbs and wings. The other spellcaster, Eaglet, who was hiding in the bushes, pursed his lips and let out a soft whistle. The loud and clear cry of an eagle came from the sky. Then, a dozen black figures swooped into the battlefield like sharp arrows and joined the battle without a care for their own safety. While the 3 spellcasters were entangled with the little green dragon, Grim painfully crawled out of the bushes. Viscous, dark red lava slowly flowed out of the broken lava armor in front of his chest and quickly gathered into a lava river in front of him. Although Grim's physique and strength would increase exponentially after transforming into a Balrog, he was still at an absolute disadvantage in close combat against a 5-meter-long, half-ton green dragon. He grabbed a basin-sized rock from the ground, and a terrifyingly high-temperature ray shot out from his eyes. After roasting one side of the rock until it softened, he pressed it against his chest. This could be considered the first step to sealing the wound on his flesh. Looking at the fierce battle in the distance, Grim endured the sharp pain in his limbs and silently closed his eyes to prepare a powerful spell. In order to avoid leaving traces of spells on a battlefield, he could not cast any area of effect spells such as Rain of Fire and Molten Core Explosion. Therefore, Grim could only choose some physical attack type, fire element witchcraft. Compared to Grim fighting the little green dragon on his own, it was difficult for the three native spellcasters to gain the upper hand against the little green dragon. The ferocious birds that swooped down could not break through the green dragon's scales. Instead, the poisonous smoke from the dragon's nostrils swept past them, killing nearly half of the eagles and vultures. These birds could not effectively harm the green dragon, and could only barely interfere with its vision. As for the vines and thorns, they were also corroded by the little green dragon's acid breath. The only one among the three who could barely keep the little green dragon busy was the berserk savage giant. However, in close combat, the little green dragon with sharp fangs and claws relied on its superior physique and incisive attacks to inflict terrifying injuries on Cobalt Blue. But this was enough. With Cobalt's death entanglement, Grim had the chance to cast spells, and the little green dragon's fate was sealed. Perhaps sensing the terrifying aura gathered by the berserk fireman, the little green dragon struggled to break free from the savage giant's entanglement. It lowered its body and quickly charged towards Grim. The fireman had already finished charging, and if it flew into the air now, it would only become the fireman's most eye-catching target. Thus, the little green dragon gave up on running away, and instead took the initiative to attack the fireman. Grim let out a furious roar and stretched out his thick magma hand. A flaming whip flew across the distance of 20 meters and heavily struck the side of the little green dragon's body. This strike was fierce, and the little green dragon staggered, knocking down 2 trees and falling in front of Grim. Grim had just finished his incantation. As he raised his hands, a terrifying sawtooth greatsword made of magma and surrounded by flames quickly formed. In the next moment, the little green dragon's mournful wails of pain rang out from the forest and stopped abruptly after a few flicks of his fingers. Grim stepped on the little green dragon's neck and pulled out the sawtooth greatsword with difficulty. The splashing green dragon blood landed on his body, corroding the fiery red lava armor into patches of dull green spots. Hurry up and start setting up. Those green dragons will be back soon. Cobalt had already exited the berserk form of the savage giant, and had turned into a middle-aged man with a face full of beard and a body full of savage muscles. He pressed one hand on his badly mutilated chest and shouted towards the forest in the distance. A young girl wrapped in a green leather armor ran out from her hiding place. Under the influence of her powerful plant energy, the forest immediately changed at a speed visible to the naked eye. The scorched ground was quickly overturned by overgrown shrubs, and the withered trees were once again covered in thick greenery. The traces of the previous battle slowly disappeared. In less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the forest returned to its original state, and all traces of witchcraft were perfectly concealed. Chapter 243. A shrill dragon roar suddenly reverberated through the mountains. Seeing that the little green dragon hadn't returned after a long time, the green dragon and the 2 little green dragons that were searching for it suddenly lowered their bodies and plunged into the dense forest. A moment later, they let out an earth-shattering, shrill roar. Then, they flapped their wings and began to circle above the nearby forest, as if searching for something. Unfortunately, no matter how hard they tried, they could not change the fact that the little green dragon had been killed. Finally, amidst the shrill roar, the adult green dragon rushed into the forest again, grabbed the little green dragon's corpse, and flew into the distant sky without looking back. The 2 lesser green dragons followed closely behind, taking the corpses of the 2 magic-breaking knights with them. When the surrounding forest regained its peace, Grim and the rest walked out of a shrub that had been temporarily removed. That's it. Grim looked at the distant sky and said in disbelief, "Dragons are not stupid. Why would they believe such a simple framing? First of all, dragons are not stupid. It's just that they believe in prophecy too much." Prophet Moss, who had the potential to be a fraud, said with a sly smile on his old face, "As long as I'm here, whatever they see through prophecy will be what I want them to see. Secondly, they also want an excuse to invade the palace. But this excuse is bigger than they expected. After some serious thought, Grimm nodded and agreed with the old man's words. Due to the existence of the Dragon Alliance, the green dragons were not shameless enough to rob the palace. However, the green dragons that came to Scandra to cause trouble these days were all underage green dragons, and many lives were lost every time. It was obvious that the green dragons were also looking for an excuse. As long as the demon hunters could not help but fight back against the green dragons would have enough excuse to break the alliance and reap a fortune before leaving this realm. Unfortunately, they did not expect that this excuse would be so big that an underage green dragon would have to pay with her life. Perhaps this was their only miscalculation. When will they come for revenge? Grimm asked. Tomorrow morning. So, if His Excellency Grimm wants to do something, he must make the most of tonight. Otherwise, I'm afraid there won't be anything left if we burn indiscriminately tomorrow. That's great. If everything goes well, I'll leave after completing the 2 tasks tomorrow. Before I leave, I will remove the seal. Then, I wish us a happy cooperation. I'm looking forward to working with Lord Massey in the future. This last sentence was from the bottom of Grimm's heart. After working together for the past few days, Grimm realized that having a prophet as a friend was indeed beneficial. Moreover, the risks were controllable and predictable. If he wanted to have a big development in the future, nurturing a loyal prophet was the most important thing. That Alice seemed to be a good seedling. The Witch of Destiny? His name carried fate, so he was definitely walking the same path as Mars. When I go back this time, I must properly train Alice. Behind Mingsu Mountain, under the night sky, Mingsu Mountain was gloomy and silent. Ever since the demonic foundry camp was built, the back of Mingsu Mountain had become a forbidden area. The Demon Hunter Knights had sent people to seal off all the paths leading into the mountain and patrol the area from time to time, forbidding anyone from entering or leaving. Moreover, the mountain was rugged and steep, with many strange mountains and perilous peaks. As a result, there were no signs of humans or beasts. Grimm snuck in under the cover of the night sky, accompanied by 2 spellcasters. One of them was the shape-shifting wizard called Cobalt, and the other was a plant-type wizard called Flower. In the battle during the day, Grimm had witnessed their strength. On the whole, they were only slightly stronger than the quasi-sorcerers in the sorcerer world, but their ability to use sorcery was much weaker. If they were to go all out, they might not even be able to defeat the quasi-sorcerers at their peak. This was actually in line with their status. A small existential plane, without knowledge and resources, what kind of talents could it nurture? Not long after nightfall, Grimm calculated the time and set up a small sorcery formation in the cave where he and the others were hiding, silently activating the fire runes in the distance. Almost at the same time Grimm cast the spell, Daphne, who had just returned to her residence, immediately collapsed in pain. It was as if her body was stuffed with 7 or 8 red-hot iron furnaces. Endless heat began to spread, boiling her blood bit by bit. Under the situation where many doctors were unable to do anything, the news finally reached the ears of the Radiant Knight in charge of the demonic foundry camp. Faced with the grievous news that his daughter's life was in danger, of course he rushed out of the demonic foundry camp without hesitation and returned home. Thus, when the prophet Mars' informant saw the Radiant Knight rush into his home, the information was successfully delivered to Grimm and the others. Without any hesitation, the ambush plan began. Below a cliff at the back of Mingsu Mountain, the metal waste that had been poured down from above had piled up at the foot of the mountain, forming a metal mine that was more than 10 meters tall. The hot waste and the humidity in the valley caused the place to be filled with a pungent smell and thick fog every night. In the past, there would always be some scavengers or wanderers who would sneak here in the dead of night, picking up some valuable items from the metal mine and bringing them back to sell. However, ever since Scandra City experienced the dragon's attack that lasted for half a month, no one came here anymore. Grimm and the others easily slipped to the foot of the mountain under the cover of the night. Looking up through the layers of fog, Grim could vaguely see a cave entrance that was more than 300 meters above the ground. The entrance was only about 4 to 5 meters wide, and there was a metal fence at the edge of the cave. Grim estimated that it would be difficult for him to reach the cave entrance with a single flaming leap. If he couldn't find a place to rest along the way, he would have to find another way with his current abilities. According to the plant-type sorcerer called Flowery found a piece of soil at the bottom of the cliff. She dug up the ground and buried a seed of the iron thread vine in it. Under her rapid chanting, a thin vine that was as thick as a finger quickly spread out and grew up along the precipice. As Flowery continued to cast spells, the vine grew longer and longer, and its roots grew thicker and bigger at a crazy rate. In the blink of an eye, it had turned into a flight of stairs that extended all the way to the bottom of the cave entrance. "It's ready. Let's go," Flowery said softly. Under her urging, 3 large green leaves sprouted out. The 3 of them stepped on them and quickly rose up in the mist like an elevator going straight up. Soon, the 3 of them stopped at the bottom of the cave entrance. With their mental strength, it was easy for them to sense the movements inside the cave. There was no one there. Of course, this was common sense. It would be strange if there were enemies in such a dangerous place. That was why the guards here did not send out regular sentries. They would only come to check on them once in a while. Moreover, the people in the city were in a state of panic. It was uncertain if the guards would still come to check on them. The green leaf slowly lifted Grim up to the entrance of the cave, allowing him to see everything inside with a single glance. There was a small tunnel inside the cave. There was a special slide on the ground, and dust and slag were all over the ground. In front of Grim was a metal fence as thick as a child's arm. It was rusty and covered in spider webs. It was obviously used to stop outsiders from entering. In order to avoid alerting the guards, Grim did not choose to use Flaming Leap to enter. Instead, he gripped the top of the 2 metal bars tightly and began to mobilize the power of fire in his body. There were no flames, only terrifying, scorching temperatures. The 2 metal bars quickly turned red and softened under Grim's grip. They slowly turned into molten iron and flowed down. Soon, a tunnel for them to pass through appeared. "Let's go in and finish this quickly," Grim instructed in a low voice and was the first to enter. A blacksmith camp without the Radiant Knights was like an undefended playground in Grim's eyes. He could do whatever he wanted. As for the few knights that were guarding it, they were no longer on his list of enemies. After walking a dozen steps along the pitch-black tunnel, they arrived at a small stone room on the side of the road. It was the resting room for the 3 guards. Grim strode forward. When he passed by the entrance of the stone room, he casually threw a fireball and continued forward. When a violent fireball exploded behind him, Grim had already walked out of the waste dump and was heading towards the entrance of the demonic foundry camp along the central tunnel that was getting wider and wider. That's right, he did not directly rush towards the heavily guarded blacksmith camp and the drawing room. Instead, he rushed towards the entrance of the camp. There were no Radiant Knights in the blacksmith camp, but there was one in the Knights' headquarters outside. If he received the news and rushed in, it was highly likely that he would block Grim's path of retreat. Hence, Grim, who had already decided to go all out, did not hesitate. The first thing he did when he rushed into the blacksmith camp was to cut off the connection between the camp and the outside world. When the first fireball exploded at the back of the camp, all the guards in the blacksmith camp were alarmed. Countless guards and soldiers rushed out of their temporary camps and residences. After experiencing a terrible commotion, they finally figured out the source of the explosion. Chapter 244. The entire foundry camp was located in the hollow of the mountain. Apart from the central living area and the foundry area, which were extremely spacious halls, the other areas were made of stone. In such a complicated and narrow passageway, it was extremely difficult to spot an enemy who had slipped in. The 2 native magi who had entered with Grim did not continue forward. Instead, they stayed at the rubbish dump and relied on the narrow passageway to fight against the incoming guards. It was because of their existence that the camp's commander focused most of his attention on the rear. Before the central area was threatened by the enemy, the camp's commander would not be so decisive as to alert the Radiant Knights above. This undoubtedly gave Grimm a chance to fish in troubled waters. The passageways in and out of the Foundry camp were very complicated. This allowed the camp's commander to easily mobilize his troops. However, this also gave Grimm a great deal of convenience. With a map of the Foundry camp provided by Prophet Masser and the AI, Chip's high-speed battlefield information collection system, Grimm was able to identify all the enemies that appeared in his mind. Under the AI, Chip's instructions, Grimm shuttled through the stone passageways. He made use of the dazzling forks and shadows to avoid the troops that were running towards the rear, quickly advancing towards the entrance of the camp. He might be able to avoid the ordinary guards, but he could not avoid the sentries at the entrance. Facing such an enemy, Grimm chose to force his way through as he strode forward. When he suddenly appeared in the area illuminated by torches from the dark passageway, before the sentries could send out a warning, a terrifying stream of flames attacked their bodies. There had never been a human warrior who could survive for more than 2 seconds under the terrifying stream of flames that Grimm had casually released. Such a short period of time was not enough for them to send out a warning. Hence, Grimm strolled through the stone passageway that was 3 kilometers long, as if he was taking a stroll in a park. He arrived at the entrance of the Foundry camp at the very front. In order to defend against the invasion of external enemies, this place was heavily guarded and heavily guarded. A stone passageway that was 100 meters long was the only way into the Foundry camp. On both sides of the passageway were many guard rooms and crossbow ports. All materials and resources that were transported into the Foundry camp had to undergo layers of strict checks before they could enter. Unfortunately, all the defenses here were used to defend against external attacks. The guy who designed this tight bunker probably never thought that the enemy would come from the inside. At this point, Grimm no longer tried to hide anything. Under everyone's horrified gazes, the figure that stepped out of the darkness rapidly transformed into a terrifying Balrog. Then, a chain of lava fireballs exploded in the long stone passageway. The most direct result of such a high-density, terrifying attack was that close to half of the stone passageway collapsed. Even Mingsu Mountain began to tremble slightly. Seeing the collapsed boulders blocking the passage, Grimm shifted his attention to the camp guards. Amidst the explosions of crossbow bolts, countless camp guards charged at Grimm. 1 magic breaker paladin and 3 demon hunter paladins were among them. Unfortunately, the narrow terrain and the crowded crowd made it difficult for them to get close to Grimm. Grimm did not care about the human warriors who were hacking at the lava shield in front of him. Instead, he focused his firepower on them. 3 lava fireballs and 2 explosive fireballs. Without even using the secret voodoo scroll, Grimm easily killed the only ones who could pose a threat to him. The violent elemental flames and magma splashed everywhere, turning the passageway where the Magic Breaker Knight and the others were in into a lava hell. Many of the human warriors were scalded by the flames and magma. They turned into torches and frantically ran among the crowd, crying for help. Unfortunately, no one could save them. The rest of them couldn't even save themselves. The human warriors surrounding Grimm did not even need him to do anything. As soon as they entered the area enveloped by the fire barrier, they would clutch their throats and gasp for air. However, every breath they took was filled with air that was terrifyingly hot. The hot air caused their tracheas and alveoli to burn like charcoal. In the end, even the clothes on their bodies started to burn. The swords and spears in their hands turned red like fire, sizzling their skin and flesh. Grimm did not need to attack. He only needed to walk among them silently, and the camp guards fell to the ground one by one, clutching their throats. Everything in the path of the flame devil turned to ash. Even the stone floor under his feet began to turn red and soften. Fiery magma flowed everywhere, quickly turning the place he was standing into a lava pool. Only now did the camp commander realize the danger of the situation. Unfortunately, against a fearsome magus, the forces left in the Foundry camp were not enough to stop the enemy's advance. When Grimm and the 2 native wizards met up in the Foundry hall, The remaining 100 or so guards of the foundry camp gathered in a corner of the hall. They were barely holding on with the help of the fortifications and rune crossbows. The shape-shifting magus called Cobalt tried to rush into the hall a few times, but he was shot back by the concentrated rune crossbows. After all, the area was narrow and there was not much space to dodge. They lacked defensive spells and equipment, so they could not withstand the concentrated attacks. With heavy footsteps, the flame devil that Grimm had transformed into squeezed his way through the tunnel with difficulty. This was an underground tunnel, after all. Many places were less than 4 meters tall, so it was extremely difficult for the flame devil to pass through. Seeing the flame devil's terrifying demonic form striding out from the depths of the tunnel, feeling the suffocating heat in the air, the two native magi looked at each other, their hearts filled with reverence for this evil magus who had come from afar. Grimm's fiery red eyes swept across the two's battered bodies. He nodded slightly and said, "You've worked hard, you two. Leave his place to me." Just as Cobalt was about to warn the Flame Devil that there were still 4 Magic Breaker Knights and a dozen Demon Hunter Knights in the hall, the Flame Devil's figure turned slightly, and the terrifying fiery figure disappeared before their eyes. In the next moment, a huge ring of fire exploded in the densest group of camp guards. The Flame Devil's huge body appeared in the dazzling light. Flame Blast. Flame Barrier. The violent and ferocious wave of fire, under the amplification of 2 layers of fire attacks, instantly turned Grimm's surroundings into a raging sea of fire. The camp guards who had been stubbornly resisting a moment ago did not even have the slightest chance to retaliate. They were instantly turned into fiery figures wailing in pain, their mournful cries rising and falling. Only the Magic Breaker Knights and the Demon Hunter Knights could survive Grimm's double attack. They raised their energy shields and withstood the raging flame blast, charging to Grimm's side with all their might. The rune swords in their hands turned into streaks of frost, breaking through the lava shields around them in an instant. However, with this little bit of buffer time, Grimm gently waved the flame scepter in his right hand, and an indomitable flame spirit immediately appeared in the hall. The first thing it did when it appeared was, naturally, to complete its only task. Self-destruct. The self-destruction of a quasi-magus flame spirit immediately caused a terrifying amount of damage to the hall. In the corner of the hall where they were standing, the stone floor under their feet was shattered inch by inch, and the surface of the solid stone walls around them was washed away by the violent flame blast. As for the camp guards who were at the center of the explosion, not even their bones were left, not even the ashes of their cremation could be found. The Demon Hunter Knights and the Magic Breaker Knights who had rushed to Grimm's side vomited blood in pain and fell to the ground, then were killed by Grimm's exploding fireballs. When the 2 native sorcerers walked into the hall from outside with complicated expressions, the hall had already turned into a terrifying hell of a sea of fire and rolling lava. As for the enemy, unfortunately, even with their eyesight, it was difficult to find the remains of the enemy. The enemy of a sorcerer was only a spellcaster of the same rank. As for the ordinary mortals, they did not have the strength to fight a sorcerer at all. Grimm's improvement in strength was also evident. Grimm's usage of fire spells had improved by several levels, and he had gradually formed his own style. He was trembling with fear when facing the magic-breaking knights when he first crossed planes, but now he was slaughtering them without any scruples. Grimm's usage of fire spells had improved by several levels, and he had gradually formed his own style. The violence and flamboyance of fire sorcery became more prominent day by day. Let's go, it's time for us to reap the rewards. The Balrog's body swayed a few times, and as the violent flame blast disappeared and the lava on the surface of his body cracked, the cultured and elegant Grimm, with the mysterious aura of a high-level spellcaster, had returned. He nodded to the 2 native sorcerers and led the way to the other side of the hall. This was the central hall of the demonic foundry camp, and there were many passages leading to different areas. The place Grimm was heading to was the drawing room, where the documents and sheepskin drawings were stored. Looking at Grimm, who seemed to be able to move with ease, the 2 native sorcerers looked at each other again, their faces filled with defeat and dejection. Both of them were grade 1 spellcasters, but the difference in combat strength was too great. In the past, they had only experienced how powerful the evil sorcerers of the sorcerer world were from the few words of Prophet Moss. But when the other party's terrifying power was displayed before their eyes, the shock from their souls to their bodies trampled on their past pride and arrogance until it was beyond recognition. If the other party was intentionally using their strength to intimidate them, then perhaps they would feel better. After all, Grimm had taken notice of their strength. However, it was precisely because Grimm did not care that the two native sorcerers felt even more tormented. Not so long ago, they had been disregarded like this. How are they any different from Grimm's lackeys now? Go to the drawing room and see if there's anything valuable. I'll go to the casting area and take a look. Maybe we can get some treasures. Magus Cobalt clutched his heart and gritted his teeth as he spoke a few words, then wobbled into another passage. Chapter 245. Crafting Camp, Drawing Room. 2 corpses of Demon Hunter Knights were slanted in front of the door, and the 2 bronze doors were wide open. The remaining heat from a door lock had yet to dissipate, and the crimson molten iron was slowly flowing downwards. It was a simple and unadorned exhibition room. Thick sheepskin scrolls were piled up on the stone platform in the center. Some were opened, some were half-rolled, and there were dried ink bottles as well as carelessly discarded quills. On the surrounding stone walls, old wooden shelves filled the entire drawing room. Displayed on them were either wooden boxes, sheepskin scrolls, or some gray cloth bags. When Hua walked into the drawing room hesitantly, Grimm was already looking through the items on the shelves. It could be seen that he had an unusual talent for appraising strange objects. He could appraise the value of any object in a few seconds. The ordinary items or those of little value were placed back on the wooden shelves, while those of great value disappeared in the blink of an eye. Space equipment. Hua could not help but exclaim in admiration. In the Knight's Plane, there was once a spellcaster with the talent of space, and he was famous for creating space equipment. Unfortunately, such a genius died tragically under the butcher's knife of the Demon Hunter Knights. The few space equipment that circulated in the Knight's Plane were all made by this genius. However, there were too few of them, and most of them were in the hands of certain powerhouses. She had only heard of a grade 1 spellcaster like her, but she had never seen one with her own eyes. Grimm turned around and saw the female spellcaster opening a huge bag, as if she was going to use the most cumbersome method to transport the items away. He could not help but shake his head and sigh. They were both spellcasters, but they were born in different worlds. Their circumstances were also very different. Grimm took out a storage pouch from his waist and tossed it to Hua. Although the space was not big, it was more than enough to store some simple casting materials. Grimm ignored the spellcaster who was happily playing with the storage pouch. Instead, he focused his attention on the sea of scrolls, books, scrolls, and blueprints. It had to be said that most of the knowledge of runes, the origin of life, and the theories of the dimensional system that the Night Kingdom had collected over the past 1,000 years were stored here. As for the treasure vault of the royal palace above, it probably stored more precious treasures, antiques, and strange items. Grimm's storage belt had limited space, so it was impossible for him to take everything away. Therefore, it was necessary to filter through the items. Grimm picked up an ancient scroll and skimmed through it. Almost all of them were crude conjectures about the origin of life. Useless discarded. He picked up another scroll. Most of the inscriptions on it were in lighter-level runes. They were useless, so he discarded them. Picking up a scroll, it actually listed hundreds of different types of runes in detail. Although it was not very useful, it still had some research value when compared to the runes of the Magus world. It was basically useful, so he kept it. Picking up another book, Grimm saw a diagram of human muscles that was similar to the one on Earth in his previous life. The wise ones of this plane had probably studied the structure of humans in depth before they successfully fused the rune energy with the life energy in the human body. It was useful, so he kept it. Grimm flipped through the scrolls one by one, discarding the simple and crude ones that he had already collected. He only kept the rare ones, or those that had extremely high research value. Apart from these necessary diagrams, Grimm found some extremely rare metal, ores, or special magic gems on the shelves. Emerald moonstone, water jade, twilight stone, Elune star, night eye stone, red obsidian, sky sapphire, shadow song purple jade, red sharp stone. These magic gems were rare even in the Magus world, but they were actually used as supplementary materials to create rune equipment. Grimm could not help but shake his head and sigh. The Night Plane did not have a systematic spellcaster system, so it was also lacking in alchemy. For such rare magic gems, it was difficult for ordinary craftsmen to use advanced alchemy to draw out their origin power. They could only break the gems and use their natural elemental affinity to bestow rune equipment with special offensive effects. This was simply the most wasteful way to use natural resources. Of course, what made Grimm even more excited was that he actually found 3 fist-sized void stones in an inconspicuous dusty bag. It was obvious that the people of this plane had also discovered the uniqueness of these stones, but they did not know their specific uses, so they could only silently sleep in this dark secret chamber. With the size of these 3 void stones, any one of them would be enough to purchase a small duchy, 80 square kilometers, in a Magus world's scattered tower forest region, allowing his clansmen to live there without worry for the rest of their lives. Grimm repeatedly adjusted his breathing a few times to calm himself down. After carefully putting away the void stones, he continued to search for treasures. It had to be said that when you had the qualifications to enter the secret chamber of a plane's ruler, anything you took from there could be priceless treasures. Therefore, the next 30 minutes was simply the most thrilling adventure Grimm had ever had since he came to this plane. The golden apple, a consumable item used in the resurrection ritual. The deception orb, able to perfectly conceal one's identity and faction, preventing all known spells from detecting one's identity. The Hakila resonance crystal, able to maintain voice communication, ignoring any magical barriers or plane barriers. The flame emblem, a magical item lost from the fire elemental plane, allows the owner of the emblem to visit the fire elemental plane as an ordinary fire elemental. The Xandra's staff, a strange ancient spell sealed within, able to turn any target into a little bleeding sheep, unless the target was immune to the transformation effect. Duration, 5 seconds, ignoring defense and magic resistance. Grimm had originally thought that obtaining a complete set of rune knowledge would be enough, but now it seemed that he had underestimated the rewards brought about by the planar war. In terms of area and resources, the Magus world was probably 100 times larger than a small world like the Night Plane. However, no matter how large the Magus world was, no matter how rich the resources were, the number of powerhouses participating in the division was still enough to make people feel despair. Although the resources in the Night Plane were scarce, once they were collected for the enjoyment of a single Magus family, the benefits of the plane would be so great that it would make people's eyes red with envy. The resources and knowledge that Grimm had collected in this simple and crude drawing room was something that he would not be able to obtain even if he worked hard for thousands of years in the Magus world. Many of them were top-tier rare resources like the Void Stone and the Golden Apple, something that people of his level could not even get their hands on. If he had not come out on a solo mission and infiltrated one of the Night Kingdom's treasure vaults, with his identity as a Tier 1 Magus, these resources and treasures would never have fallen into his hands. In comparison, the common magic mithril, underground adamantine, magic agate, arcane crystals, and krypton gold were no longer able to excite Grimm. However, just as Grimm and the others were excitedly inspecting their harvest, a deafening roar came from the depths of the tunnel. Immediately after, the entire demonic foundry camp began to tremble and shake. The enemy was opening up the tunnel. Almost instantly, Grimm figured out the source of the tremors. It was time to retreat. The more he obtained here, the more cautious Grimm became. Furthermore, the main rewards of this trip, the rune equipment blueprints, rare rune catalogs, rune energy analysis, and the rune energy usage guide that he valued the most were all in his hands. The remaining miscellaneous items were no longer as important. After bidding farewell to Huahua, Grimm quickly walked out of the drawing room. When he returned to the central hall, the loud roar in the distance became even clearer. At this moment, Cobalt Blue transformed into a tall and sturdy 3-meter-tall barbarian giant. He carried a sword on his back, held a sword in his hand, and strapped to his waist were all runic equipment of Ling Lang's. Among them, Grimm saw 3 complete sets of Grade 2 Radiant Knight armor, while the rest were standard equipment for Grade 1 magic-breaking knights. Grimm's heart skipped a beat, and he casually tossed out a Magus pouch. Based on the principle of fair trade and his eloquence, he traded for a Grade 2 Radiant Knight armor and rune weapon from Magus Cobalt Blue. Of course, Magus Cobalt Blue happily accepted such a good fortune from the heavens. Very soon, the 3 of them gathered together and hurried to the back of the camp, laden with spoils of war. Just as they arrived at the entrance of the mountain behind the demonic foundry camp, the 3 Radiant Knights finally worked together to open up the entrance to the camp. Under the impact of a berserk force, boulders and rocks flew in all directions, causing the stone tunnel to be full of holes and sparks to fly everywhere. Amidst the huge dust cloud, a tall, radiant figure strode out from the pile of rubble, his imposing aura radiating in all directions as he surveyed everything before him. Behind him, the narrow tunnel that could only fit 1 person at a time was filled with falling rocks, and danger lurked everywhere. Robust and majestic figures passed through the tunnel, quickly making their way to various parts of the demonic foundry camp. Find those damned intruders. I want to tear them to pieces. The Radiant Knight's furious roar resounded throughout the demonic foundry camp. Chapter 246. That night, the Kingdom of Knights was in an uproar. The real battle report from the front line finally came back. More than half of the 6,000 Demon Hunter Knights were annihilated in the Greenland forest, and the rest were scattered into the wilderness. It would be difficult to gather them back in a short time. The detestable Count Winlier of Blue Hill City, who caused the information cut-off, actually raised his army and openly defected to those evil wizards who came from another plane. As for the higher-ups of the knights who fought, only 5 Radiant Knights escaped back to Hiduran City with 100 subordinates. That was how they managed to send back the real battle report. The giant dragons betrayed them on the spot. Sir Willis, a level 4 Holy Knight, left with the giant dragons. Of the 3 Dragon Knights, 1 died in battle, and the other 2 were lost in the wizard camp. The terrifying wizard tower stood tall in the depths of the Greenland forest and could no longer be shaken. The bad news came like snowflakes, and the old king finally could not hold it in anymore. He vomited blood again. However, just as the giant dragons betrayed the kingdom and the kingdom was in a precarious situation, even the most important forging camp of the knights was suddenly attacked. This made all the Demon Hunter Knights even angrier and more violent. The Radiant Knights, who were trapped in the palace, led the furious knights to attack everywhere. They began to search for suspicious people in Scandra City. As a result, Scandra City instantly turned into a terrifying whirlpool of storms, engulfing everyone who was caught in it in a wild and destructive manner, mincing them into pieces. It was a night of chaos. When it was almost dawn, Scandra City finally regained some peace. However, at this moment, the prison of the royal capital was already overcrowded, and wails could be heard everywhere. However, before the restless people could calm down, a series of loud and violent dragon roars came from the distant sky. A large number of giant dragons were attacking. After experiencing the dragon attack that lasted for 17 days, the royal capital was already used to such terrifying dragon roars. However, today was obviously different. Not only did the giant dragons come early and quickly, but they also circled above the palace as soon as they appeared. They came with ill intentions. For a moment, the sky above the palace at the top of Mingsu Mountain was covered by these ferocious giant dragons. There were 23 adult green dragons. Among them, there were 5 level 3 green dragons, 7 level 2 green dragons, and the rest were all level 1 young dragons. After circling around in the sky, the green dragon in the lead let out a furious roar. Amidst the earth-shattering roar, the weathered rocks on the nearby mountains began to peel off, tumbling down to the foot of the mountain. After venting the frustration in its chest, the green dragon in the lead finally flapped its wings and hovered above the palace, roaring loudly. "Edward VII, get your ass out here. Hand over the dragon killer immediately, or we will raze your palace to the ground today. Hurry up and come out. Hand over the murderer." The long and violent dragon roars were deafening, causing the entire palace to tremble and buzz. Countless palace guards were hidden on the towers and walls of the palace, ready to attack, but no one dared to take the initiative to attack. For a long time, the majestic and mighty giant dragon was their backer, a powerful partner who lived in peace with them. Now that they had turned against each other, everyone had mixed feelings that were hard to describe. Even though the capital had been ravaged by the giant dragons, and even though the human cities had been tormented by the giant dragons, they had been protected by the giant dragons for a long time. The people were still resentful, but deep in their hearts, they hoped that the giant dragons would repent and form a friendship with the kingdom again. Under the guidance of this mentality, the people of the capital had complicated feelings towards the giant dragons. There were those who hated them, and those who hoped for them, but most of them were confused, a kind of confusion towards the giant dragons, towards humans, and towards the future. In a grand and magnificent hall in the palace, 8 radiant knights were anxiously crowding around a soft couch, looking at a group of medical officers who were doing their best to save His Majesty, who had a golden complexion. However, their king was already on the verge of death and was in the last moments of his life. It was obvious that he would not wake up again. What should we do? The giant dragons have already arrived. Without His Majesty, how can we negotiate with the giant dragons? Yes, the giant dragons did not come with good intentions this time. I'm afraid a war will break out. And now His Majesty, the Radiant Knights frowned as they discussed. It was obvious that they could not make up their minds about the matter at hand. Finally, the most senior of the Radiant Knights took off his helmet, revealing his pale, white hair and a resolute face. He said, "In this time of crisis, we have been supported by the Edward family. We cannot abandon them and abandon them." The Radiant Knights' expressions changed, and they replied in unison, "We are willing to do our best with you and swear to protect the safety of the kingdom. Now, I order Augustus and Andrew to guard this place. Do not let His Majesty be slaughtered by the giant dragons." "Yes, yes." "Sarah, Cleary, find the princes immediately and bring them away from the palace. If we get through today safely, return immediately. If war breaks out, you don't have to worry about this place. Bring them east, the further the better." The 2 who were named were both female Radiant Knights. Their expressions were sorrowful, and they choked with sobs as they nodded. "The rest of you, follow me to see what these giant dragons are up to. We are willing to advance and retreat with you, my lord." Amidst the faint sounds of sobbing, the 4 Radiant Knights tidied up their equipment and strode out of the palace with a solemn and stirring spirit. However, just as everyone's attention was attracted by the tense confrontation in front of the palace, a tall Radiant Knight in full armor was hurrying towards the palace hall with 2 other magic-breaking knights. Taking advantage of this dangerous situation, a large number of Demon Hunter Knights began to station themselves in various parts of the palace. The palace guards were also in a state of panic. At this time, the powerful Radiant Knights were the cornerstone of the stability of the entire kingdom. Who would dare to check the identity and actions of a Radiant Knight? Thus, Grimm brought Cobalt and Hua and successfully entered the vicinity of the palace hall. They secretly hid in a side hall. The old Radiant Knight, who strode out from the front hall, had undoubtedly attracted the attention of the dragons. Seeing the 4 Radiant Knights walk out, the especially large green dragon in the lead folded its wings and landed on the wide platform. Human, ask your king to come out. He must hand over the covenant gem and the dragon murderer today, or we will raze this place to the ground. The green dragon in the lead roared loudly. Respected dragon emissary, I don't know what made you dragons so angry. Our Night Kingdom has been the loyal partner of the great dragon for thousands of years. But now, you're the ones who have attacked our capital and our city. And today, you have come to ask for the covenant gem and the murderer. Is this what friends should be doing? Insignificant human worm, do not show off your tongue. The great green dragon Razio will not listen to your nonsense. Call your king out, or I will barge in. The green dragon in the lead was violent and unreasonable. It was obvious that he was not going to let this matter rest. Grim, who was hiding in a side hall far away, heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the level 3 green dragon in the lead was barbaric and overbearing. Otherwise, he would have taken the risk to start a war if there were signs of peace talks. At this critical moment, he only needed to run to a group of demon hunters who did not know the truth and order an attack, and it would immediately start a bloody war. But fortunately, the green dragons were more unscrupulous than he had imagined. It would be strange if the knights did not retaliate with such a forceful approach. As expected, just as the old Radiant Knight pulled out his glowing rune sword to block the green dragon's path, one of the demon-hunting knights shot out a rune arrow in panic, where a young green dragon spat out a green dragon's breath. A terrifying battle that engulfed the entire battlefield erupted in an instant. Under the horrified gaze of countless palace guards, streaks of terrifying wind poison and acidic dragon breath rained down like a storm. All the human warriors who were caught in it died before they could even escape. The warriors who were enveloped by the wind poison fell to the ground, their faces black as they were poisoned to death. And the warriors who were drenched by the acid poison had their flesh and blood corroded into a sticky green liquid like a roasted candle, leaving only charred bones scattered on the ground. On the ground, arrows and crossbow bolts were fired at the same time. Streaks of flame arrows and frost arrows pierced through the sky and shot into the group of dragons. With crisp clanging sounds, countless arrows were swept down from the sky by the dragon's wings or tails, but there were still a few young dragons who were shot into the gaps between their scales. For a moment, cries of pain could be heard from the group of dragons. A few adult green dragons immediately swooped down, using their huge bodies to cover the many young green dragons. Under the command of the adult dragons, the group of dragons quickly rose higher, gradually leaving the range of the crossbow bolts. This did not mean that the dragons were retreating, but it was a sign that the dragons were about to attack. With a drawn-out dragon roar, 2 adult dragons in front, 3 young dragons at the back, and 5 huge green dragons flapped their wide wings and began to swoop down from the sky at high speed toward the palace below. The 5 green dragons opened their mouths in anger, and a large ball of terrifying acid began to quickly gather in their throats. The next moment, 5 thick streams of acid poison instantly plowed a path of death among the people on the ground. And most of the crossbow bolts on the ground were blocked by the dragon's scales. Even if the nails occasionally pierced into the flesh, the damage was not enough to interrupt the dragon's frenzied breath. Chapter 247. In the eyes of the natives of all material planes, the dragons were super predators at the top of the food chain. If there were any demon hunter knights who doubted this in the past, today's battle between humans and dragons would prove to them that this theory was correct. When a row of 5 green dragons swooped down from the sky with a sharp roar, then plowed a path of death on the ground with their terrifying dragon breath, and the densely packed arrows of the humans were unable to do anything to the green dragons. The despair in the hearts of the humans was immense. Due to their good relationship with the Dragon Valley, Scandra City, which had been worry-free for thousands of years, not only did it not have city walls, it also did not have any ballistae or catapults that could threaten the dragons. Therefore, when faced with the dragon's destructive dragon breaths, the well-equipped palace guards could only flee in all directions and die in agony in the billowing green smoke. The only thing that could harm the dragons was the high-ranking knight's berserk sword skills. Unfortunately, when the magic-breaking knights took advantage of the first few waves of dragons to use their berserk sword skills on them, the dragons groaned in pain. The next few waves of dragons' attacks were consciously focused on them. In the end, the magic-breaking knights could not withstand the concentrated attacks of the dragons. A large area of poisonous wind breath and a short but quick spit of acid eliminated the high-ranking knights who were among the palace guards. As for the 4 radiant knights, they were locked in a fierce battle with the tier 3 green dragon Lazio on the square in front of the palace. They did not have a chance to help their companions and subordinates who were in dire straits. Among the 4 radiant knights, only 2 walked the path of violence knights. The rune energy gave them a boost in strength, which was why they were able to threaten the tier 3 green dragon in close combat. As for the other 2 radiant knights, they focused more on speed and technique. Although this gave them greater agility, it also made it difficult for them to break through the green dragon's tough scales and hurt its body in close combat. The 4 radiant knights darted around the huge body of the tier 3 green dragon Lazio, dodging the dragon's terrifying jaws, ferocious flaps of its wings, and terrifying swings of its tail. Only when their companions attracted the green dragon's attention would someone rush forward and use the most violent sword skills on the green dragon's weak points. Regardless of whether the attack was successful or not, the attacker had to retreat from the green dragon's attack range as soon as possible. Otherwise, the green dragon Lazio's swift counterattack, be it breath, bite, claw, or tail sweep, was not something that the radiant knights could withstand. The green dragons had 2 main ways of breathing. One was to breathe poison over a large area for a long time, which was their favorite choice when diving. But in close combat, the green dragons could also spit out acid quickly to attack their enemies. Although the range of this acid was not wide enough, it was short and fast, and the attack power was not weak. Within a range of 20 to 30 meters, even the radiant knights, with their defense and magic resistance, would not dare to take on the attack head-on. Otherwise, their flesh and blood would be corroded, and their bones would be charred. The battle had only lasted for a quarter of an hour, but the green dragon's huge body already had 7 to 8 inch long wounds. Even the radiant knights, with their defense and magic resistance, did not dare to take the attack head-on. Otherwise, their flesh would be corroded and their bones would be charred. The battle had only been going on for 15 minutes, but 7 or 8 inch long wounds had already appeared on the green dragon's huge body. His right armpit had also been badly mutilated by the berserk sword technique. Patches of dark green dragon scales had been blasted away, revealing a huge bloody wound. Although such an injury looked horrifying, it was only considered a moderate injury on a colossal dragon with a strong and sturdy body. 2 of the 4 radiant knights had already retreated from the battlefield. One of them was hit in the chest by the green dragon's tail. Although he used his sword to block the attack, the violent force still broke his sternum, causing him to vomit blood. As for the other, his right arm had been completely destroyed by the acid, and he could no longer wield his sword. Even the remaining 2 were covered in wounds. They were so tired that they were gasping for breath. They looked like they were barely hanging on. It couldn't be helped. Dragons had always looked down on the world with their powerful physical strength and terrifying magic resistance. Their valiant strength allowed them to fight enemies of a higher level than them. As such, the rank 3 berserk green dragon before them actually had the combat strength of an ordinary rank 4. The 4 radiant knights were only at rank 2. They had fought a rank 4 powerhouse with their physical bodies, and this result was the result of them putting their lives on the line. For a moment, the entire palace at the peak of Mingsu Mountain was filled with the mournful wails of the human guards and the sharp whistling of the giant dragons as they swooped down at high speed. There were people running for their lives with their hands over their heads. Everywhere was charred land left behind by the dragon's breath attack. Scattered human skeletons and pools of terrifying green liquid were even more shocking. On the walls of the palace, the roofs of the halls, the towers and the streets, the corpses of half-melted guards could be seen everywhere. Hiding in a side hall, Grim and the other two saw the carnage outside. They all had different feelings. As natives of this plane, Cobalt and Huahua watched as the palace guards were slaughtered. They felt a great sense of relief, but at the same time, an indescribable sense of sorrow welled up within them. Grim, on the other hand, did not feel the slightest bit of pity or remorse for the humans of another plane. This was actually the most common attitude in this plane. Magi believed that only the humans of the Magus world could be seen as their own kind, as their bloodline originated from the land of origin. In the eyes of Magi, the humans of other worlds were just a bunch of humanoid creatures. This situation was similar to the online games on Earth. Magi were a bunch of intruding players, and the natives were just NPCs that looked like humans. Hence, Magi did not feel the slightest bit of guilt when slaughtering these natives. Originally, Grim had thought that it would be difficult for him to cross the threshold in his heart. However, as he watched the humans of another world being massacred by the dragons, he was so calm that it was as if he was watching a fantasy play. He could not help but sigh inwardly. These few years of training in the Magus world had indeed changed him a lot. Seeing that the time was ripe, Grim did not dare to delay. He stretched out his hand and drew a dark red rune in the air. When a strange rune with flames lingering around it was completely formed, Grim pursed his lips and blew. The rune disappeared in an instant. Grim then took out a strange orb with a strange shape and swallowed it. All right, the rune seal on the books I gave you has been removed. Grim turned around and said indifferently, "Send my regards to Prophet Moss." With that, he did not wait for the response of the two native Magi. He pushed open the door and strode towards the hall in the distance. "How is it? Any response from the prophet?" Magus Cobalt could not help but ask. "Don't let that Magus fool us." Magus Flowery placed his right hand on his forehead and closed his eyes to sense for a moment. Finally, he opened his eyes and nodded. "The spell seal has been removed. The prophet wants us to return immediately. Let's go." Magus Cobalt nodded silently. He watched the terrifying figure of the distant Magus, then turned around and retreated along the path they came from. They were not here to help Grim. They were here to protect him, to prevent any unforeseen events from happening before he removed the rune seal on the books. The agreement between the two sides had been completed the moment the dragons attacked. Prophet Moss had used his wisdom to help Grim lure away most of the Radiant Knights. If he still could not kill Edward VII, it was because he was too weak. The prophet was not to be blamed. It was still the same exquisite and spacious palace. The tightly shut palace doors were suddenly knocked open by a staggering figure. The newcomer was wearing the dazzling armor of a Radiant Knight. It was covered in the terrifying corrosive marks of the green dragon acid. The visor had obviously been hit by an external force as well. It was warped and deformed, and the exposed skin was covered in a large pool of blood. It was difficult to tell who it was. The two Radiant Knights guarding the palace were shocked. They pulled out their rune swords at the same time. When they saw the newcomer's attire, they breathed a sigh of relief. They rushed forward and were just about to support their companion when they heard the man's hoarse voice shouting, "Hurry up and save him. Hurry up!" Before he could finish, the newcomer had already fallen to the ground. His head drooped. He had clearly fainted. The battle ahead must be dangerous. Otherwise, the Lord would not have sent someone back to ask for help. "I'll go take a look. You stay here and continue protecting His Majesty." The slightly older Radiant Knight made a prompt decision. After giving a few simple instructions, he got up and hurried out of the palace with a few other Radiant Knights, heading straight for the place where the battle was the fiercest. The Radiant Knight who stayed behind felt like 100 claws were scratching at his heart, but he could only forcefully suppress it. His attention was immediately drawn to his companion on the ground. As high-ranking knights, although their mental strength was not as strong and sharp as that of spellcasters, it was still far beyond that of ordinary people. Any companion's aura could be directly distinguished with just a slight touch. However, it was extremely strange today. He could clearly sense a familiar aura from the injured lying in front of him, but he could not determine the identity of a newcomer. Could it be that the giant dragon had cast some strange spell on him? He lifted his companion's body in doubt and pulled it over. Just as he was about to take off the distorted helmet of the injured, he suddenly felt a pain in his abdomen, as if a hot iron bar had been stabbed directly into it. He looked down in surprise and found that the injured's right hand was red like fire. It was fiercely stabbing into his abdomen, as if it was trying to push deeper. In the next moment, a huge wave of flames rose into the sky. Chapter 248. Enemy. It was only when the fire demon's form was revealed that the Radiant Knight was certain of the other party's identity. The fire demon's rapidly expanding lava hand pierced through the gaps in his armor and tore through his flesh, burning fiercely in his stomach. This kind of pain, this kind of anger, stimulated the Radiant Knight to go berserk. If it were an ordinary person, they would have long since exploded and died under the infusion of such violent fire energy. But the Radiant Knight, who had long since gotten used to the two types of energy, was only injured but not dead. He even used the explosive increase in strength and physique to counterattack. Having no time to draw his sword, the berserk Radiant Knight raised his iron-gloved fist and punched the fire demon's chest, instantly shattering the lava shield outside his body. The fist that had not yet stopped even sent the fire demon, who was taller and taller than him, flying. The fire demon flew into the air, his steel-like chest collapsing in an instant. The sound of bones cracking could be heard clearly. And as the fire demon's large hand pulled out, a huge wound suddenly burst open in the Radiant Knight's abdomen. Purplish-black blood, mixed with broken organs, spewed out under the pressure of the violent fire energy. But these filthy things were vaporized by the extreme heat before they could even land on the ground. The Radiant Knight groaned, his body swaying twice, and finally knelt on the ground in pain. Grim, who had been sent flying more than 10 meters away, fell heavily to the ground. When he struggled to get up, he spat out a mouthful of sticky blood on the stone floor in front of him, the purple blood of the fire demon igniting in a strange flame. Facing a great enemy, the two raised their heads at the same time, staring at each other with hatred. Time waits for no man. They had to kill the other party before he recovered from his injuries. Almost at the same time, a resolute thought surfaced in the minds of the two. The Radiant Knight stretched out his right hand, and a strange scarlet flame suddenly appeared on it. He gritted his teeth and stretched out his hand, pressing the energy flame on the wound on his abdomen. Amidst the sizzling sound of flesh and blood, the Radiant Knight was in so much pain that he hovered between life and death. But he also successfully used the violent energy flame to annihilate the remaining elemental flames in his body, and then forcefully sealed the exposed wound on his abdomen. Although this method was simple and crude, even the slightest movement would bring him intense pain. Countless bloody wounds appeared on his charred belly, and dark purplish blood slowly flowed down. But this way, he would still recover some of his combat power. As long as he moved faster and finished off his opponent earlier, he would still have a chance to slowly deal with his injuries. Grim, on the other hand, opened his mouth wide and swallowed 5 bottles of alchemy potions of different colors. Amidst the crackling sounds of flesh and bones, the broken bone fragments were squeezed out of the body by the magma flesh, and the collapsed chest also swelled up again under the guidance of the magical force. However, the remnant energy storm of the Radiant Knight was still wreaking havoc in his body, making it difficult for him to gather enough magic power. The magic-breaking knights around the hall roared and charged at the Balrog Grim had transformed into. They could clearly see that both sides had suffered injuries in the short contact just now. As long as they could give their Radiant Knights a moment to catch their breath, their chances of eliminating the enemy would increase greatly. However, these magic-breaking knights who had never set foot on the battlefield in the Greenland forest knew that for a powerful sorcerer, distance was never a weakness, but an advantage. Almost as soon as Grim caught his breath, the secret voodoo scroll that never left his side had quietly appeared in his hand. It began to flip on its own. A moment later, When the secret voodoo scroll automatically stopped at a certain page, a brilliant aura of magic burst out. Resistance Ring of Fire. This was a special spell that combined fire damage and physical repelling abilities. Waves of fire spread out from Grimm in a ring shape, and anyone who came into contact with the Ring of Fire would have to endure the burning and stagger back. Now, other than the powerful knights who specialized in strength and physique, the rest of the demon hunters could no longer get close to Grimm and interrupt his spellcasting. The pages of the scroll were still flipping rapidly. When the pages stopped, another powerful spell was activated. Molten Core Fire. This spell could be considered as the most powerful fire spell that Grimm had mastered. Under the guidance of Grimm's vision, the violent and ferocious fire energy quickly gathered around the Radiant Knight. It only took a moment for it to turn into the most ferocious explosion of flames, inflicting terrifying elemental damage on the enemy's body. The Radiant Knight, who had just finished healing himself, was extremely sensitive to elemental fluctuations. Sensing the violent elemental fluctuations around him, he raised his head and let out a furious roar. He brandished his sword and charged out of the range of the molten core fire. As his body rose into the air, the rune's sword shone brightly, and a terrifying energy blade quickly swept across the space of 10 meters, landing heavily on Grimm's body. The Balrog could not maintain its agility like a human knight due to its huge body size. Seeing the energy blade piercing through the air, Grimm could only try his best to dodge to the side. As he dodged, energy quickly gathered in his fiery red eyes, and a strengthened version of the flaming ray shot out, slashing at the enemy who was charging at him. Puff! Two different sounds rang out at the same time, mixed with the pained and suppressed screams of two people. Fortunately, Grimm had consciously avoided being hit in his vitals, so the Radiant Knight's powerful attack only managed to split open his right chest and shoulder. In the 1-meter-long wound, the shockingly hot magma splashed out and landed on the mirror-smooth marble floor, immediately softening the floor. The flaming ray shot out from Grimm's eyes was blocked by the Radiant Knight's sword. The terrifying heat gathered on the sword, and the elemental energy and rune energy surged, bursting out with a blinding light. As the two were locked in a stalemate, the Radiant Knight grabbed at the air with his left hand, and a dazzling energy spear appeared out of thin air. He threw it with all his might, and it pierced through the lower abdomen of Grimm's Balrog incarnation. Grimm continued to quickly flip the scroll in his hand, and retaliated with a flaming storm. In a close-range confrontation, although single-target sorcery attacks were powerful and concentrated, it could be easily countered or dodged by melee professions with various means. Thus, in order to ensure continuous damage, Grimm had no choice but to use a large area of effect fire spell. After all, Grimm was an elemental wizard who specialized in fire, so any fire spell he cast would have a huge increase in power. Thus, once again, the two enemies who were less than 10 meters away from each other fought to the death. However, at this moment, the numerous guards in the hall had already rushed forward, and rune arrows of different colors rained down on Grimm. The Magic Breaker Knight mixed in the crowd, brandished his sword, and rushed to Grimm's side with all his might. However, this was not a direct threat to Grimm's life. As long as he could catch his breath, he could use the remaining 4 powerful spells in the scroll to kill them all in one fell swoop. It was a pity that in such a crowded battlefield, where would he find the time to fight? Perhaps by the time he endured the enemy's attacks and killed all the annoying flies with an instantaneous spell, the Radiant Knight would have recovered from the previous attack and calmly dealt a fatal blow to him. What was even more frightening was that Grimm's powerful mental perception had already detected a terrifying life force approaching quickly from outside the hall. The Radiant Knight who had just left had already sensed that something was wrong and was rushing back to the hall with all his might. There was no time to hesitate. Grimm activated the secret voodoo scroll without hesitation. This time, he chose the Defying Ring of Fire, which had the ability to repel enemies. When the many human guards were incinerated into ashes, and the magic breaker knights raised their energy shields to resist the flames, Grim quickly took out a gray wooden stick from his storage belt and pointed it at the radiant knight in front of him without hesitation. "I've heard of Nohin, sheep transformation." As a green light rolled on the wooden stick, the radiant knight that was pointed at by the stick exploded into white mist with a bang, leaving behind a small and cute white sheep on the ground. At the same time, the AI chip's prompt sounded in Grim's mind. Sheep transformation completed. Encountered strong willpower resistance. Effect reduced by 40%. Duration, 3 seconds. It was only a short 3 seconds. This was not enough for Grim to kill someone of a higher rank. Not far behind him, the door to the hall was shattered by the violent energy. Another radiant knight's body flickered with fluorescent light as he charged in furiously. Grim sighed inwardly, knowing that he no longer had the chance to kill or injure his enemy. He took a step back, and with a flame leap, he left the place. As soon as his figure disappeared, a terrifying energy blade slashed across the place where he was just standing. An explosive ring of flames appeared, and when Grim reappeared, he was already in front of Edward VII's bed. Flames and heat waves surged in all directions, and a few medical officers who were guarding the king were instantly set ablaze. Flames soared into the sky, and when the light dimmed, scattered charred bones were scattered all over the ground. However, when this wave of heat surged towards the dying king, it was blocked by a formless energy barrier, not harming him in the slightest. This energy barrier was not activated by a spell formation or a rune formation, but by a mysterious ruby the size of a pigeon egg that hovered around the king's neck. This mysterious ruby was obviously not an ordinary item. After being triggered by the crisis, it had activated its own energy barrier, protecting itself and the king within it. Energy field? Grim was so surprised that he almost cried out. Energy fields were a form of self-protection unique to high-grade creatures. Even without the help of spells, they could use their own strength as the core to condense a defensive barrier that could block most external attacks. Some high-grade magic artifacts also had similar properties. This ruby was obviously not a living thing. In that case, it had to be a high-grade magic artifact at the very least. Grim did not hesitate any longer, holding nothing back from the secret voodoo poison scroll in his hand. 2 explosive spells were cast in succession, instantly shattering the self-activated energy field. He then used his fingers like a blade to behead Edward VII. Before the 2 radiant knights could reach him, Grim grabbed the head and the ruby necklace, and with a flame leap, he left the hall. Chapter 249. 13 days later, in the wizard camp. The last time he left, the camp was still a horrible scene after a bloody battle. The terrible forest fire directly burned nearly 70 miles of the southern part of the Greenland forest. The dust raised after the burning of the trees, and plants covered the sky. Even Blue Hill City was covered in black snow for 3 days in a row. Corpses could be seen lying on the scorched ground where black smoke was rising in spirals. In some of the core areas of the fire, the corpses of the demon colts and demon hunters were burned into charcoal, leaving only vague traces on the dark ground. Only at the edge of the battlefield, where the thick layer of grass and wood ash was brushed away, it was possible to find some strange substances formed by the fusion of some bones and metal armor. To be honest, when the Knights of Light blew the horn to retreat in the last war, there were still nearly 1,000 demon hunters left. However, they had lost their magic colts and the hope of victory. With their physical strength exhausted and mental breakdown, it was impossible for them to outrun the spreading forest fire. So seriously speaking, there were only a few demon hunters who were lucky enough to escape from the last planar war. This was also the main reason why the Kingdom of Knights could not get the latest information from the front line. Of course, among them, the betrayal of Blue Hill City's governor, Count Winlier, also played a crucial role. As the first native force of the Night Plane to surrender to the Salubo family, Count Winlier was immediately rewarded by the wizard. According to the nobles who participated in Count Winlear's surrender ceremony, the chosen wizards were a group of wise men and sages who mastered profound knowledge and the supreme truth of the world. An amiable and powerful wizard even personally enhanced Count Winlear's bloodline, turning him from an ordinary human into a noble immortal. From then on, he could get rid of the shackles of birth, aging, sickness, and death, and no longer have to worry about the threat of death. So when Count Winlear was baptized, he could fly freely in the sky with his own strength. The originally terrified nobles immediately changed their tune and praised the greatness and nobility of the wizards. And the kingdom of knights that the nobles were originally loyal to, in their words, immediately became a puppet regime that only knew how to wag its tail and beg for mercy behind the giant dragon, cruelly oppressing the people. Meanwhile, these proclamations were corroborated by the dragon's calamity that had been ravaging human cities recently. Hence, these proclamations quickly spread among the people of the Knight's continent. For a moment, Welcome the Wizards, Banish the Giant Dragon, became the most powerful and resounding voice in the lower levels of the Knight's continent. When Grimm stealthily returned to the southern part of the Greenland forest from the Kingdom of Knight's territory, what he saw and heard along the way made him extremely surprised. Originally, he thought that the wizards would only use force to conquer the plane. In the eyes of the great wizard, Salubo would not care about these lowly and insignificant civilians. But now, it seemed that even the powerful great sorcerers completely understood the power of the people. Bewitch the people, lead the people, and then pull the people at the bottom to their side. This was the fastest way to eliminate the plane's resistance in a short period of time. Otherwise, even if the Kingdom of Knights was destroyed with lightning speed, there would always be some stubborn forces that missed the old dynasty hiding in the dark and inciting the people's rebellious emotions. Once the order of the plane became unstable for a long time, the benefits that the Salubo family had usurped from this plane would inevitably suffer. Hence, along the way, Grimm could not help but sigh in admiration as he saw the changes that had happened to the natives. Attacking and absorbing those in power was the easiest way to seize the greatest benefits in a short period of time. Taking in the middle class and bewitching the people at the bottom was a necessary method to eliminate the resistance forces. From these methods, it could be seen that the Magi of the Salubo family had their own profound understanding of the control of planes. Based on the situation at hand, Grimm could even make a bold guess. As long as the Magus camp sent out some good-looking Magi and displayed some miracles in name, it would be easy to win over the hearts of the people. At that time, they would be able to successfully banish the giant dragon under the watchful eyes of everyone, and this plane would truly fall into the hands of the Salubo family. During the previous planar war, Lord Salubo had a secret discussion with the leader of the Green Dragons for a period of time. Could it be that they had set the tone for the war? Otherwise, no matter how one looked at it, the actions of the giant dragons now looked like they were cooperating with the Magi in a performance. In any case, this plane would no longer belong to them. Taking advantage of the final moment before they left, they would wantonly obtain a fortune. This could be considered a form of compensation for the giant dragons. This would also give the new ruler of the plane, the Magi, a chance to win over the hearts of the people. With Grimm's status as a rank 1 Magus, it was naturally impossible for him to come into contact with the core secrets of the family. He could only make a preliminary assessment and conjecture based on what he had seen and heard along the way. Though the Chip's conjecture was a little sinister and malicious, Grimm did not doubt at all. Perhaps this was because he was now a Magus who lived up to his name. The new Magus camp could no longer be considered camp, but more like a rapidly rising city. The nearby forests had all been burned down, which was good for them. It saved the Magi the trouble of cutting down trees. When Grimm returned, the place was undergoing a large-scale construction. Small-scale stone towers rose from the ground, and the mountains were undergoing large-scale remodeling. Under the command of the Magi, groups of wizard beasts cleared away debris, leveled the ground, and cleaned up the site. Of course, all the previous wizard beasts had been destroyed in the last war. This new batch of wizard beasts was obviously made in a hurry, and they looked like centaurs. Their lower limbs were densely covered in black fur and scales. Their sinister bodies and terrifying claws made them look like demon colts. On top of their beast-like bodies was a sturdy human torso. They could speak and use weapons and tools flexibly. Wasn't this just a hodgepodge of the lower body of a demon colt and the upper body of a demon hunter knight? They also had a nice name, Rune Knights. Yes, these wizard beasts would be equipped with the most basic rune equipment in the future. They could be considered a powerful force that the Magi had nurtured in this world. The sorcerers would not be able to stay in this plane for a long time in the future, so most of the plane's affairs would still need to be handled by the local nobles. The sorcerers only needed them to hand over the resources and wealth they needed on time. To deal with these puppet nobles, they had to tempt them with benefits, but they also had to suppress them with power. The Rune Knights were left behind by the Cerubo family in the future, the most powerful secular weapon to protect the Magi's rule. Lord Cerubo was still meeting Grimm in the Wizard Tower of War. Ever since the Wizard Tower of War was built, this human projection was no different from Lord Cerubo's clone. Looking closely, Grimm could not tell that this was not a real person, but a projection of his consciousness. The first thing they did after meeting was, of course, to hand over the items for the mission. Lord Cerubo sent Grimm to the capital of the Kingdom of Knights with 2 missions. One was to kill the ruler of the Kingdom of Knights, Edward VII, and the other was to retrieve the complete rune knowledge. Grimm completed both missions without a hitch. After handing over the head of Edward VII, a complete set of rune blueprints and knowledge scrolls, Lord Cerubo finally nodded in satisfaction after a simple inspection. Of course, on the way back, Grimm had already scanned all the data and knowledge on the documents, blueprints, and scrolls into the AI chip, so he was willing to hand them over. Lord Cerubo picked up the ugly head that had been treated with witchcraft and tossed it into a strange spell formation that was projected from the floor. The wizard formation floated in the air a meter above the ground. The entire wizard formation was formed by 3 layers of glowing wizard rings and countless strange runes mixed within them. The human head floated up and down, and under the analysis of the dazzling witchcraft halos, there seemed to be a faint bloodline power being extracted and floating above the human head. After the bloodline power was extracted, great wizard Cerubo, who had been sitting with his eyes closed, gently drew a line with his finger. A powerful rune appeared out of thin air and was inserted into the spell formation. As the war wizard's pagoda trembled slightly, a huge amount of energy that terrified Grimm passed through the defensive system and crazily surged into the illusory spell formation. The bloodline power was like a red gossamer, slowly floating above the spell formation. For a moment, Grimm seemed to see through the hazy shadow and saw close to 1,000 strange faces in the swimming red threads. Some were old, some were young, some were young. Even though they were of different ages and had different expressions, they all had a deep connection with the bloodline power. Seeing this scene, the name of a powerful and strange magus appeared in Grimm's mind. Bloodline Curse. This was an extremely powerful top-notch witchcraft, as well as one of the most vicious curse spells. Edward VII was undoubtedly the supreme ruler of the Edward family in the Plane of Knights. With him as the source of the bloodline, it was impossible to count the number of descendants and grandchildren born from him. If one included the many illegitimate children of the royal bloodline, it would be extremely difficult for the wizards to capture all of the Edward family's bloodline in one fell swoop. But with the bloodline curse, it was a completely different story. With Edward VII, the source of the bloodline, in addition to the personal control of the Great Wizard and the energy supply from the War Wizard's pagoda, hence, under Grimm's shocked gaze, the talisman that the great warlock had cast into the void was drawn by the power of his bloodline and disappeared without a trace. In Grimm's sharp senses, it seemed that the moment the rune disappeared, some of the laws of this dimension had been deeply affected. Inexplicably, Grimm had an epiphany. Perhaps in this dimension, All life forms with the bloodline of the Edward family had reached the end of their lives. As expected, it was as if an invisible needle was continuously piercing the illusory bubbles. The illusory faces attached to the bloodline power suddenly let out shrill cries of pain, then started disappearing one by one. And the disappearance of each face meant the disappearance of a life in the distance. Grimm swallowed a mouthful of saliva with difficulty. Even though he was also a wizard, even though his hands were also stained with blood, Grimm still felt his heart tremble when he saw such a method of exterminating an entire family, as if it was a game. Chapter 250. After taking care of the chores, it was time for Grimm's most anticipated mission reward. Last time, he had worked hard during the Planar War, and he had gotten a flame demon's heart that matched his attributes. Now that he had completed 2 missions so smoothly, what kind of reward would he get? The gloominess he felt from witnessing the bloodline curse was quickly disappearing. Somehow, Grimm's heart was filled with excitement again. A magic crystal card that represented 100,000 magic crystals and a standard wizard tower. This was the final reward Grimm had gotten for his trip to the Planar War. This kind of reward could not be said to not be generous. One had to know that an ordinary wizard participating in a Planar War would normally earn between 30,000 to 50,000 magical crystals. However, Master Sarubo had directly increased it to 100,000, which was obviously a recognition of Grimm's strength and hard work. However, compared to the reward of a wizard tower, 100,000 magic crystals seemed insignificant. This wizard tower promised by the great wizard Sarubo was completely different from the swamp tower that Grimm had stayed in before. At the end of the day, the swamp tower was still the private property of the Sarubo family, and Wizard Anderson was only temporarily controlling it as a wizard stationed in the tower. However, the wizard tower would become Grimm's private property, and it would be completely under his control. This also meant that from now on, Grimm would have a safe space that the Sarubo family could not invade or take away. This kind of wizard tower was worth more than 200,000 magic crystals in the wizard world. However, this kind of reward could not be given out in the night plane, so Grimm's new wizard tower could only be left until he returned to the wizard world. After choosing a suitable location, the Sarubo family would naturally be responsible for the subsequent construction and material consumption. This was obviously a way for the Sarubo family to retain their talents. If Grimm wanted to get this reward, the only way was to sign a new contract with the great wizard Sarubo and not leave the Sarubo family for 100 years. After thinking for a while, Grimm agreed. After the reward was given out, Grimm left the great wizard Sarubo's room and was immediately invited by Wizard Forgan. He was eager to see Grimm because he wanted to ask about Grimm's future plans. Now that the night plane had stabilized, the Sarubo wizard family's rule would quickly expand. So there was an urgent need for a large number of wizards to fill the power vacuum after the collapse of the Night Kingdom. At the same time, the main plane's sorcerer world and the 2 secondary planes couldn't be left empty for too long, so they needed sorcerers to keep watch. This was why Forgan took the initiative to ask for Grimm's opinion. He wanted to know what kind of lifestyle Grimm preferred. Grimm asked a few questions in a low voice. Only then did he know that before he returned, all the wizards in the camp had already made their decisions. He didn't care what the other magi chose, but the 2 he cared about, Mary and Intich, both chose to stay in the Knight's plane. He couldn't help but feel that something was off. But thinking about it, this seemed to be completely reasonable. Mary and Intich were both bloodline sorcerers, and their individual growth was vastly different from that of elemental sorcerers. Strictly speaking, both of them walked the path of bloodshed and slaughter. As a vampire sorcerer, Mary's growth could not be separated from a nourishment of large amounts of high-quality fresh blood, which was obviously difficult to obtain in the Magus world. Here, however, the fleeing demon hunters, spell breakers, and radiant knights could all become her prey. As long as she put in the effort, she could reap a completely worthwhile harvest. In the Magus world, however, magi of the same rank would never allow her to hunt or ambush them as she pleased. Similarly, The demonic worm in Titch also needed large amounts of high-quality flesh to nurture more carrion beetles. Therefore, staying in the Knight's Plane to eliminate the remaining demon hunters was not a bad choice. Facing two old friends who could grow stronger through continuous slaughter, the elemental sorcerer that Grimm had chosen for himself could not do this at all. Elemental sorcerers paid more attention to the understanding and application of laws, which required the accumulation of vast amounts of knowledge and techniques. Therefore, they could not be lazy. Even with the help of the AI chip, Grimm would take fewer detours than others, and he would take less time to accumulate knowledge. However, it was still a long and arduous process to gather such a vast amount of knowledge. Such knowledge was difficult to find in the Knight's Plane. After some deep consideration, Grimm chose to return to the Magus world. After all, that was the origin of Magi, and it was much easier to gather knowledge there than in other worlds. As for the resources that would support his future survival, his bulging storage belt was his greatest guarantee. Before he left, Grimm had the intention to meet Mary and strengthen their relationship. Unfortunately, the internal affairs of the Knight's Plane were busy, and the Magi who chose to stay had already been sent to various places by Forgan. Thus, Grimm could only follow the 12 Magi through the Void Vortex and return to the Cerubo family's plane. Here, Grimm once again saw Lord Cerubo's true body. After Lord Cerubo saw them, the only thing he did was grab with his bony hands, and pieces of fragments that flickered with a strange light were extracted from their souls. Grimm felt a piercing pain in the depths of his soul as he was sandwiched in the crowd, but he recovered after a while. Seeing the fragments of souls that the great Magus Cerubo had extracted, Grimm could not help but feel a chill in his heart. He could not help but communicate with the AI chip. AI chip, can you determine what Cerubo took away? Beep. AI chip's database is querying. BZZT, BZZT, BZZT. Abnormal error discovered. A portion of the database is missing. Warning, warning, the AI chip's database has suffered slight damage. A portion of the data has been lost. AI chip, be more specific. What kind of data is it? Beep. Data regarding the original coordinates of the Knight's Plane. So that was it. This time Grimm understood. What the great Magus Cerubo had extracted from everyone's souls was none other than the coordinates of the Knight's Plane. The Knight's Plane had now become the third plane of the Cerubo family, and had become the great Magus Cerubo's personal property. Once the coordinates of this matured material plane were leaked, it could attract many predators and enemies to plot against him. Hence, when Grimm and the other Magi of the family came out of the Knight's Plane, the first thing the great Magus Cerubo did was to erase the relevant information from their souls. It was obviously not the first time the Magi of the older families had experienced something like this, so they were unperturbed. As for Grimm, Corgan, and a few other Magi, they all revealed expressions of bewilderment. However, those who could stand here were all scheming people, and they quickly concealed their bewilderment. You've done well on the plane this time. Your contributions have been recorded by the family. When you return, the relevant rewards will be given one by one. All right, you may return. The great Magus Cerubo's head was still lowered under his black robes, but his deep voice echoed clearly in everyone's minds. The Magi all bowed in acknowledgement. After exiting the grand secret spell hall, the Magi nodded to each other and headed to their respective destinations. Grimm, Corgan, Felicia, and Keel were obviously going back to the Magus world, so they traveled together and smoothly returned to the family's wizard tower through the teleportation circle in the demiplane. As soon as they stepped out of the teleportation formation, they groaned at the same time. Keel, who had the strongest physique, only held his head and felt dizzy for a moment, but he soon recovered. Felicia, who had the weakest physique, was paralyzed on the ground, unable to get up. Grimm and Corgan also held their heads in their hands, silently enduring the pain brought by the plane's law. After staying in the Knight's Plane for so long, their bodies and souls were contaminated with the aura of another plane, so they had to adapt to the sudden return. Harrison, who was left behind in the wizard tower, sensed the abnormality of the teleportation circle and appeared in the hall almost instantly. Seeing the appearance of the others, he pondered for a moment and understood the reason. Under his orders, 7 or 8 young acolytes, male and female, rushed forward, intending to help the Magi back to their residences to rest. The sturdy Keel waved his hand and waved away 2 acolytes who came forward. In just a short while, he had basically recovered to his normal state. Physique refinement Magi's ability to control their bodies was really enviable. Grimm's physique was also quite special. After completing his elemental transformation, his body no longer had many fatal flaws like when he was a human, so he was the second Magus after Keel to recover. Grimm waved away the acolyte's support and silently watched as Corgan and Felicia were sent back to their residences by the acolytes. In the depths of his soul, as his powerful spiritual force resisted the waves of the plane's backlash, Grimm's mind kept ringing with the AI chip's clear voice. Detected the penetration of foreign energy. Preliminary analysis shows that it is greatly beneficial to the Magus spiritual force. Does the host want to cut it off? Damn, it's beneficial to spiritual force. Cut it off? Do you think I'm stupid? Grimm unhappily ordered. No need to cut it off. Continue monitoring. Got it. Continue monitoring. In Grimm's mind, on the bar chart that represented his body's stats, all of his main attributes began to rise rapidly, and the rate of increase was getting faster and faster. In the end, when a sudden change in data stopped, Grimm's new data was also released. Grimm, human, semi-elemental, male, grade 1 elemental magus, body, strength 2, 6 agility 1, 1 vitality 3, 7. Chapter 251. Plain feedback. It's plain feedback, Grimm exclaimed in his heart. Although he still could not figure out the mechanism and principle behind plain feedback, it did not stop him from immersing himself in the ecstasy of the sudden increase in his power. At the level of laws that his eyes and his power of the will could not reach, there were countless chains of laws that were continuously coupled with some content in his sea of consciousness. If Grimm could reach the level of a level, for law-defying wizard, he might have discovered that the content of the coupling was basically the rune knowledge he brought back from the night plane and the resentment of the powerful beings he had slaughtered. The plane's laws trembled in the void, and the end of the chain of laws sunk deep into Grimm's soul, coupling with the scattered knowledge fragments and the complete set of rune knowledge that Grimm had just obtained. Although most of the rune knowledge in the sorcerer world was similar, the part about energy fusion was completely new. Most of Grimm's plain feedback was based on this. Grimm's basic strength could increase by 2 to 3 times, and to be honest, most of it was because of this new rune energy fusion knowledge. Although other wizards had more or less obtained part of the rune energy fusion knowledge from the planar war, none of them could compare to Grimm, who had directly robbed the Night Kingdom's treasury of knowledge. Therefore, the knowledge fragments they brought back from the other plane supplemented part of the sorcerer world's laws, and they naturally received positive feedback from the plane's consciousness. Of course, in this process, Grimm undoubtedly had the biggest share, and the other 3 added together could not even make up half of his share. Apart from the plain feedback of the rune knowledge, Grimm's resentment of the powerful beings also received a certain amount of plain feedback. This kind of resentment of the powerful beings could not be obtained just by fighting. It could only be obtained by slaughtering a powerful being whose strength was recognized by the plane's laws. Grimm had slaughtered many magic breaker knights in the night plane. He had even killed a radiant knight with his own hands. On top of that, he had killed a shocking number of demon hunter knights. The resentment he had accumulated in exchange for a considerable amount of planar feedback. From this point alone, it could be seen that the sorcerer world, which was dominated by the sorcerers, actually encouraged the killing of outsiders. The Magi's evil, cruel, and extremely aggressive nature had also infected the plane's consciousness, causing the entire Magus world to display a chaotic, evil, and brutal world will. However, compared to the demons of the lower realms, the Magi had a tinge of elegance amidst their brutality. They were considered to be extremely calm and wise lunatics, different from the complete chaos and madness of the abyssal demons. However, Grimm couldn't find out about the deep secrets of the plane at the level of the laws. Hence, apart from passively withstanding the feedback from the plane, the only thing he could do was to use the AI chip to record every change in his body, paving the way for future research. The changes in the Solubo family did not attract much attention from outsiders. Of the 7 wizards who had set off from the wizard tower in Ferdinand, only 4 had returned. Mary and Intich had chosen to stay in the Plane of Nights. There was also a wizard who unfortunately died in the battlefield of another plane. Although the Solubo family had successfully gained control of a secondary plane, the origin of the sorcerer world had to bear the consequences of the sharp decline in the number of sorcerers. The reason why the great rank 6 Magus Solubo had given Grimm such an extravagant mission reward was so that he could stay in the family for 100 years, allowing the family to smoothly pass through this period of weakness. When the resources from the Plane of Nights were continuously sent back, the Solubo family would be able to flourish once more. Before that, to prevent the weakness of the family from attracting the covetous eyes of outsiders, a powerful newly advanced magus like Grimm had to stay. In the scattered forest of towers, there are many magus families. The complicated geomagnetic territories and the messy relationships between the families caused the flames of war to fly everywhere. Although large-scale sorcerer conflicts were forbidden here, the territorial disputes of small areas and the fights between individual sorcerer families were not forbidden. The big fish ate the small fish, and the small fish ate the shrimps. If any magus family showed signs of fatigue, the secular territories and resource points under their jurisdiction would be invaded and occupied by the surrounding magus families. Every once in a while, a war would break out between the XXX family and the XXX family, and the XXX Lord and the XXX Lord would fight each other. Such news would never end. With the sharp decline in the number of magi in the Solubo family's headquarters, it was impossible to hide such news. This also meant that in a short period of time, the 13 secular territories and 9 resource points that belonged to the Solubo family would attract the covetous eyes of outsiders. A few small-scale family wars were unavoidable. Grimm's outstanding performance in the Planar War had allowed him to sign a new Magus contract with the great Magus Solubo, so he could be considered a core Magus of the family. Thus, some of the core secrets of the Solubo family were revealed to him. The Solubo family was a mid-ranked Magus family in the scattered forest of towers. They had 73 rank 1 official magi, 4 rank 2 magi, and 2 rank 3 magi. As for the number of higher-ranked magi, it was not something that Grimm could know with his current authority. With such a Magus force, he had to take care of the Magus world's headquarters, 3 secondary planes, and a half-plane that acted as a transit hub. If the sorcerer's power was distributed among these planes, each region would be stretched to the limit and would be a little inadequate. Recently, the Solubo family had focused most of their forces on the newest plane, the Knight's plane. This caused the other regions to be lacking in Magus forces. Therefore, the most important thing now was to use the limited number of people to gather together and fight off the neighboring forces that were eyeing the family's strength. As the core of the family, Magus Kogan was faced with a difficult family war the moment he returned from the Planar War. In the past 2 to 3 months, the Solubo family's secular territory had been seriously challenged by external enemies. A Viscount's territory with an area of more than 50 square kilometers had been invaded by neighboring lords, and the outer defensive strongholds had been lost. The Viscount that belonged to the Solubo family could only lead his remaining troops to hide in the castle at the center of the territory, barely resisting the enemy's attack. The territory was in danger. Apart from that, a few resource points that belonged to the Solubo family had also sent out warnings. A serious conflict had broken out between the acolytes guarding there and the acolytes from neighboring families, and they were desperately asking for help from the family's headquarters. News of goods being looted from the trading and secret spell shops that the Salubo family had stationed in other places had also spread. The local managers were also frantically asking for help from the headquarters. Wave after wave of requests for help and urgent secret spell messages were sent back to the Wizard Tower in Ferdinand City like raindrops. Since the number of magi stationed at the headquarters was too small, they could only temporarily suppress the situation. Apart from sending a few quasi-magi and elite acolytes to stabilize the situation, they could not really solve the problem. Therefore, when Kogan returned to the Wizard Tower to take over the family's affairs, he was faced with such a chaotic and disorderly situation. Of course, this situation did not mean that any Magus family wanted to start a full-scale war against the Salubo family. The reason for this situation was most likely that the neighboring Magus families had heard about the abnormality of the Salubo family, so they were using all sorts of methods to pressure them. If the Salubo family's weakness was real, then they would not have enough strength to deal with the challenges of the neighboring Magus families. It was only natural that they would lose a few secular territories and even a few resource points. As long as the Salubo family could use their tyrannical strength to fight back against the enemy's provocation, then the troubles at the borders would disappear in an instant. In the end, the competition between Magus families was still about the strength of Magi. Without enough Magus power, wanting to occupy a large amount of Magus resources was undoubtedly a delusion. Fight back and smash all the claws of the enemy. Similar roars and clamors had become the unanimous voice of the Magi of the Salubo family. Having just experienced the planar war, the family's Magi, whose strength had increased explosively, were bursting with confidence. In the family meeting organized by Wizard Kogan, they roared crazily and unanimously decided to use even more ferocious attacks to beat back the enemy's ambitions. Therefore, a frenzy of mission distribution was set off. There were already traces of enemy Magi in a few of the family battlefields. If they did not quickly send people over, the family's interests would be in jeopardy. Therefore, after some distribution, Wizard Keel rushed to Krella. There was a family's rank 1 resource point there, and it could not fall into the hands of outsiders. Rank 1 resource points were actually equivalent to the Magi's classification of resource points. Resource points could be divided into 3 levels according to the value of the breeding resources inside. Rank 3 was the lowest, and it was usually responsible for breeding some low-level magic beasts or normal resources. The magic swamp that Grimm came from belonged to this category. Rank 2 resource points usually bred special resources of the Magus level. As for Rank 1 resource points, they might have strategic resources that were crucial to the family's development, so they could not afford to lose them. Wizard Felicia rushed to the Emerald Hills. There was a batch of important goods that had been robbed, and she urgently needed a wizard to take care of it. Wizard Buckingham continued to stay in Ferdinand City. Chapter 252. Caltea Hills, Rocker Castle. How could a small viscount have such a sturdy and luxurious castle? Hence, from the beginning of its construction, Rocker Castle wasn't just a defensive fortress. Instead, it was more inclined to be a semi-manor for the nobles. The main body of the castle covered an area of 30 acres, and the thin outer wall of the castle was only 3 meters tall. For the sake of cleanliness and beauty, there were no towers or blockhouses. Instead, there were exquisite artistic statues and busts of beautiful women. The only thing that could stop the enemy was the outer wall. It could only allow 2 people to pass by, and there was no room for any larger war equipment. Such a castle's defense system could be used to deal with some roaming bandits, but it was a little inadequate to deal with the elite troops sent by another lord. To be honest, if not for the number of elite acolytes from the Salubo family station here, Rocker Castle would have fallen 7 days ago. However, ever since Viscount Tanner's scouts discovered the presence of Magi in the enemy's camp, the entire castle was in a state of panic, and it was difficult to continue. Even the elite acolytes from the Salubo family did not dare to step out of the castle. They could only throw a few fireballs at the enemy's attacking troops from the walls every day. The strength of Magi was well known, not to mention the ordinary soldiers and citizens. Even the usually arrogant elite acolytes felt uneasy when they heard the news. The two quasi-magi and 6 high-ranking acolytes gathered together to discuss not how to defend against the enemy's attack, but how to escape in time if the enemy magi could not hold back and attacked. As for confronting the magi head-on, the thought never crossed their minds. However, they were glad that the magi from the family had arrived before Rocker Castle fell. Kogan and Grimm's 4-wheeled carriage entered Rocker Castle at dusk. The patrolling cavalrymen who were in charge of surrounding the castle tried to stop them, but a lava fireball made their efforts futile. After losing 11 lives, the rest of the cavalrymen frantically fled back to the camp in the distance, and the enemy camp did not send anyone to intercept the slow carriage. Weren't they here to force the Magi of the Salubo family to show themselves? Now that the Magi of the Salubo family had appeared, the level of the war was no longer a battle for territory. It had become a conflict and learning from each other between the two Magi families. Perhaps he could take this opportunity to gauge the strength of the Salubo family's Magi. The welcoming banquet for the wizard was arranged in the spacious reception hall on the first floor of the castle. When the black, unadorned 4-wheeled carriage slowly stopped in front of the castle gate, Viscount Tanner, 6 elite apprentices, and many relatives were waiting respectfully on both sides of the road, gazing at their life-saving straw with fervent eyes. Although the family had informed them in advance that there would be a wizard coming, they didn't know who it was. Therefore, when the elite wizard apprentices saw Wizard Kogan's familiar face, they immediately let out a sigh of relief and smiled. However, the tall, unfamiliar figure that followed Wizard Kogan out of the carriage made them silently whisper. Under the wide black cloak was a young and delicate face. His black pupils were rare, and his brown hair flowed down to his shoulders. He was wearing a free and easy skin-tight leather suit, which made his 2 meters tall burly body look even more fit and healthy. Grimm's gentle temperament mixed with the cold and evil aura of a sorcerer, giving him a completely different and evil aura. This wizard was so young. For a moment, the faces of many young ladies and mature ladies rippled with unconcealable shock and astonishment. However, they were immediately attracted by the evil smell on Grimm's body. Their faces began to blush, and their hearts began to race. It was rare for them to reveal the shyness of a young girl. Although Viscount Tanner was the lord of this place, he still didn't dare to show any disrespect to Wizard Kogan, who represented his family. He quickly stepped forward and waved his servant away. Afterward, he personally helped Wizard Kogan down from the carriage. "Mr. Kogan, you're finally here." Viscount Tanner's face was filled with a flattering smile. "If you came a little later, I would have died for my family." Wizard Kogan sneered in annoyance. He knew this Viscount Tanner's personality too well. Once the castle was lost, he would definitely run away with his beautiful wife and children at the first possible moment. However, this Viscount Tanner had quite a bit of history with his family, so he still had to give him some face. Soon, Viscount Tanner noticed Grimm behind Kogan. This unfamiliar wizard made him hesitate for a moment. "Mr. Kogan, who is this Mr. Wizard?" "This is the new wizard of my family, Grimm. This time, he and I will be taking care of things here." Wizard Kogan gave a simple introduction. As soon as he heard it was a new wizard, Viscount Tanner couldn't help but mutter. "Lord Kogan, could it be that Kiel, Farrell, and Buckingham are not coming?" From his tone, it was clear that he was not very confident in this new Wizard Grimm. If Wizard Kogan didn't support him, he would have already been punished by the wizards for his disrespectful words. "Humph, the internal affairs of the family is not something you can interfere with." Wizard Kogan interrupted his nonsense and annoyance. "All right, let's not talk about unnecessary things. Hurry up and disperse these people." Wizard Grimm and I still want to hear the latest news of the battle. After saying that, Corgan greeted the 2 prospective sorcerers of the family who were standing in the front row. As for the 4 elite wizard apprentices behind them, Kogan didn't even look at them. The temporary meeting was held in a secret room on the second floor of the castle. Although the castle was filled with thousands of people, only 10 people had the chance to enter this secret room. Wizard Kogan, Wizard Grimm, 2 prospective wizards for elite wizard apprentices, Viscount Tanner, and his most valued noble knight. This noble knight was also the commander of the Viscount's army. Otherwise, he wouldn't have the right to enter this secret room. Last time, you guys reported that you found some wizards in the enemy's camp. Do you have more detailed information? Kogan asked as soon as he sat down. Although he was very confident in his and Grimm's ability, if there were too many wizards on the enemy's side, it would be very easy for them to make a mistake. 3 of you. A prospective wizard with a black eye patch on his right, I replied softly. Lanya and I caught a small noble in the enemy's camp. From him, we found out that the enemy had invited 3 wizards. I think one of them was Wizard Carlos from the Mikan family. As for the other 2, I don't know. Carlos. Wizard Kogan slightly frowned, tilted his head, and briefly introduced Wizard Carlos's information to Grimm. 3 wizards? This was going to be a little difficult. While the people in Rocker Castle were having a secret meeting, a small meeting was also being held in the camp far away. It was a big, wide cowhide tent. The decorations inside were gorgeous, and even the floor was covered with soft and comfortable carpets. Although it was in the wild, there was a delicate copper stove near the tent, and a refreshing aroma wafted out from it. In the center of the tent sat 3 mysterious sorcerers of different forms, and behind each sorcerer stood 2 or 3 excited prospective sorcerer apprentices. Below the tent, only Lord Terrace and a few generals had the right to sit. The rest of the nobles and knights could only stand where they were, quietly listening to the wizards. A young prospective wizard with a strange white dove on his shoulder stood in the middle of the tent, loudly reading the latest information he had just received. Grimm, male, probably less than 20 years old. Gasps of surprise could be heard in the hall, but this did not stop the young wizard from continuing to read. Time of advancement should be 3 months ago. Place of advancement: Magic Swamp, a level 3 resource point of the Salubo family. Apparently, there were 2 other young wizards who advanced together with Grimm. One of them was Wizard Mary, who had the body of a vampire, and the other was Wizard Intitch, who had the body of a half-insect. However, ever since they entered the Salubo family's wizard tower in Ferdinand City, they have never appeared again. This time, it seems that only Wizard Grimm came with Wizard Kogan. After listening to the information brought back from the Salubo family, the purple-cloaked wizard sitting in the front seat couldn't help but sneer. A little guy who just advanced 3 months ago. I'm afraid he hasn't even stabilized his power of the will yet. If Kogan brought someone like this out, it seems like his family is really weak. An old wizard sitting on the left side of the purple-cloaked wizard asked softly with a long staff in his hand. Did the reports say what kind of witchcraft Wizard Grimm is good at? What is his natural ability? The young wizard lowered his head and quickly read through the information in his hand. He shook his head and said, Respectable Wizard Kogan, the information did not say anything about Wizard Grimm's natural ability in spells. After all, he accidentally advanced in a remote place, and our information on him is not complete. Didn't you go to the resource point where he stayed to collect any information? Wizard Kogan said with a dissatisfied look on his face. I'm sorry, Wizard Kogan. We have secretly sent some people to investigate. The young quasi-wizard's face stiffened, and he hurriedly explained, but it seems like there was an accident when the 3 young wizards were advancing, and it caused the Sarubo family's Wizard Anderson and all the apprentices at the resource point to die mysteriously. That's why we made such a mistake in collecting information about them. Anderson, that coward, is dead. The 3 magi looked at each other, and a contemptuous smile appeared on their faces. The experienced Wizard Corin still wanted to ask something, but he was stopped by Wizard Carlos, who was the leader of the group. What's there to worry about now? Wizard Carlos sneered. Other than that Kogan, who is a bit hard to deal with, our opponent is just a new wizard. When the time comes, we can just send one person to hold him down, and the other 2 can attack Kogan together. Do you think they have a chance to turn the tables? Everyone nodded in agreement. Although Wizard Kalan was a little worried, when he thought about Wizard Carlos's arrangement, it made sense. Therefore, he decided to keep his mouth shut. The third wizard, who was shrouded in black mist, remained silent the whole time. It seemed like he was not interested in this discussion at all. However, for some unknown reason, even Carlos, who was sitting at the head of the table, looked at the black fog with a hint of reverence and fear in his eyes. It's decided. Tomorrow at noon, we'll fight the enemy. We must teach those wizards from the Salubo family a good lesson. Wizard Carlos yelled in excitement. Chapter 253. The second day. From dawn onwards, the siege began once again. Thousands of sparsely scattered people gathered at the front of Rockhall Castle. The warriors in the front held square shields in their hands, simple but thick wooden planks hanging from their heads as they slowly approached the castle's gates. Behind them were militia wearing light leather armor, holding spears, bows, and arrows. As for the personal guards of Lord Terrace, they remained in front of the camp and did not move. They were all heavy infantry wearing heavy armor, holding heavy oak shields in their hands. Their weapons included flails, swords, spiked hammers, and other heavy weapons. From afar, they looked like a group of terrifying killing machines wrapped in thick steel. There were not many of them, only about 300 of them. But these 300 or so heavy armored warriors were the elite troops that the Lord of Terrace had spent 10 years building, squeezing out all the resources in his territory and expending 10 years of hard work. In small-scale battles with the surrounding lords, Terrace had relied on this invincible iron chariot to forcefully flatten 3 or 4 baronial territories, making a name for himself. However, considering that there were many sorcerers' acolytes in Rockhall Castle today, in order to prevent the elite troops from being injured, Viscount Terrace could only first send in the militia and mercenaries, hoping to use them to deplete the wizard power of the opposing acolytes. Very quickly, the battle began when the enemy entered within 50 meters of the castle walls. Arrows as dense as locusts rained down from the top of the city wall, mixed with many fire arrows. Although there was a movable roof to block the rain of arrows, there were still people falling from the gaps between the thick wooden planks. Clusters of flames danced on the wooden planks, burning the dry wood until it crackled. Finally, the advancing attacking troops were attacked by the defending sorcerers' acolytes. 3 witchcraft fireballs and 2 light green acid balls drew long arcs in the air as they flew down from the top of the wall and landed on the vanguard of the siege troops. The sudden explosion of the wizard fireballs immediately enveloped an area with a radius of 10 meters. All the attacking warriors in the area were instantly set ablaze, throwing away the weapons in their hands and running around in confusion. The area where the ball of acid landed exploded into a ring of green, acidic mist. All the warriors who came into contact with the mist let out miserable cries that sounded like the wailing of wolves and the howling of ghosts. The exposed flesh of a human warrior that was drenched by the acid quickly melted with a sizzling sound, turning into a pile of scattered charred bones in the blink of an eye. Most of the soldiers only had their leather armor and clothes splashed with a little bit of acid. However, such an attack would not cause as much damage as the witchcraft fireball, as long as the part that was contaminated by the acid was cut off in time. Faced with the terrifying sorcery attack, the warriors in the formation became hesitant, and their advancing speed became slower and slower. The commander of the army, who was supervising from the rear, roared loudly. Under his urging, the soldiers who only had simple and crude armor shouted in unison, once again increasing their speed of advancement. When the attacking troops advanced another 20 steps, the second wave of magic attacks came. But almost at the same time as the second wave of attacks, 5 huge fireballs suddenly rose from the advancing troops and flew toward a certain spot on the city wall. A spell had just been activated there, somewhere on the city wall. A senior apprentice from the Salubo family had just thrown out a witchcraft fireball when he saw 5 menacing witchcraft fireballs flying towards him with long tails. "Quick, protect me!" The senior acolyte quickly retreated, while desperately casting defensive spells on himself. Around him, 5 or 6 castle guards raised their shields and quickly blocked the apprentice behind them. Asterisk dong dong dong. Asterisk the 5 witchcraft fireballs exploded almost at the same time, showing the ferocity of the elemental flames. The terrifying damage caused by the stacking of the energy was not something that a mere metal shield could defend against. The violent and ferocious ring of flames exploded on the city wall, instantly turning everything within 10 meters into powder. Then, as it was thrown outwards, it was burnt to ashes. The 7 castle guards in front of the high apprentice were instantly killed. Even their bodies were blasted into pieces, leaving them in an unrecognizable state. Within the area enveloped by the witchcraft fireball, only the senior apprentice escaped in a sorry state, his face charred black. The high apprentice who was lucky enough to escape quickly hid in the crowd and took out some hemostasis ointment and healing potions to heal himself. Bastards, these apprentices from the Mycon family actually dared to play dirty. The Salubo family apprentice on the city wall immediately flew into a rage, throwing witchcraft fireballs at the area where the other party was hiding as if they were free. The other party did not show any signs of weakness and conjured colorful defensive spells, dodging and retaliating at the same time. In a moment, the entire city wall was filled with exploding witchcraft fireballs. Grim silently stood in a luxurious bedroom on the 3rd floor of the castle. He lifted a corner of the curtains and observed the battlefield in front of him. He could not help but frown slightly. This was somewhat unexpected. It was not that they were strong, but that they were unexpectedly weak. Having just experienced the bloodbath of the planar war, he felt that no matter if it was the intensity of the battle or the power of the witchcraft spells, it could not compare to the bloodshed and cruelty of the planar war. However, the greater difference between them seemed to be reflected in the determination of their battle wills. In the planar war, it was either you die or I die. If you lost, not only would you die, even the world you lived in would become a secondary plane that others could trample on. Hence, the natives of this plane were extremely valiant in battle and would not rest until they were dead. However, the battlefield in front of him was soft and loose, as if they were playing house. Perhaps the soldiers on both sides knew that they were not the main characters of the battle, so they were extremely cautious and did not take the initiative. There were more than 1,500 people on the city wall, but the ones who had suffered the most casualties were the 10 acolytes. Since the start of the battle, more than half of the 100 or so people who had died had been accidentally injured by the acolytes. The number of soldiers who had actually fallen to the crossbows did not even reach 30% of the total number. What a boring game. Grim let down the curtains and muttered unhappily. Returning to the wooden table, Grim continued to play with the rank 2 Molten Giant's core, but the AI chip in his mind was rapidly processing the large amounts of data in the database. The rune knowledge he had obtained from the drawing room in the Kingdom of Night's blacksmith camp was undoubtedly comprehensive and detailed. With it, Grim would be able to pry into some of the deeper mysteries of energy fusion. However, these runes were knowledge from another plane, and if he wanted to use them in the Magus world, he would have to continuously explore and explore them. Hence, after returning to the Magus world, Grim had been frantically calculating and deducing day and night. From the 173 special runes he had obtained from the Knight's plane, apart from 122 basic runes and 23 variant runes, the remaining 28 runes were completely new runes that had never appeared in the Magus world before. Hence, if Grim wanted to use this knowledge of runes in the Magus world, he could only slowly explore and find out the possible variations and effects of these 28 new runes in the Magus world. Hence, during this period of time, his mind was filled with the strange runes dancing in the air. With the AI chip operating at high speed, every time a new rune was analyzed, Grim would have to go to different levels and different angles to verify whether the newly deduced runes could replace the runes from another plane. This undoubtedly consumed a lot of time and energy. After returning to the Magus world from another plane, Grimm had already met with the goblin cabbie once. Grimm had handed over most of the useless resources he had seized to cabbie, and he had also gotten back the elemental crystal cores he had collected during this period of time. Out of the 98 elemental crystal cores, only 56 were suitable to be transformed into magic puppets. Among them, 34 were quasi-magi and 21 were high-grade. What made Grimm the happiest was that there was actually a poison-type magus core among them. Grimm's magic puppet army could be said to have been depleted in the foreign plane battlefield, and he urgently needed to replenish it. Currently, apart from the Lord of the Flames, he had no other magic puppets he could use. This would undoubtedly reduce his battle power by more than 30%. However, the Cerubo family's crisis had forced him to run around everywhere, and he had no time to calm down and replenish his magic puppet army. This undoubtedly made him even more frustrated. Before leaving this time, Grimm had used his authority to exchange for a wizard-ranked meditation spell from the Wizard Tower in Ferdinand City. Just this alone had cost him 20,000 magic crystals and 7 clan contribution points. However, he had only managed to obtain 100,000 magic crystals and 20 clan contribution points after risking his life in the foreign plane. However, judging from the effects of meditation, it was worth it to pay such a price. His spiritual force, which had not moved in the past, had finally shown some changes. This was undoubtedly a huge boost to him. As long as he persevered day after day, there was a chance that he could raise his spiritual force to 20 points. Reaching 20 points in spiritual force was one of the basic requirements to advance to rank 2. According to the AI chip's calculations, without any external help, Grimm would need 171 years to raise his spiritual force from 6 or 3 points to 20 points just by relying on his daily meditation. This was the result of the AI chip optimizing the meditation spell to the greatest degree. Regular magi with no resources or knowledge had to busy themselves with their daily spells, and they had to run all over the place to gather resources and knowledge. If they wanted to rely on meditation to reach the limit of 20 points in spiritual force, they would need at least 300 years. For example, the Magus Anderson that Grimm was familiar with had advanced for 200 to 300 years, but his spiritual force was only 9 points. It was too far away from the limit of 20 points. Perhaps this was the biggest reason why he took the risk and wanted to use the blood sacrifice ceremony to make a breakthrough. If he did not do this with Magus Anderson's strength, he would definitely be one of the first to die in the planar war. Just as Grimm was drawing a strange green rune in the air, footsteps could be heard outside the bedroom, followed by the voice of a maid. "Lord Grimm, Magus Co. Jin has requested for you. Is the war about to begin?" "Yes. Lord Co. Jin wants you to be prepared." "Understood." Chapter 254. When the sorcerers stepped onto the battlefield, this warm-up's war game finally came to an end. In front of the castle, the attacking and defending parties were still engaged in a lukewarm battle. Although at every moment there were soldiers falling under the barrage of crossbow bolts and arrows, and at every moment there were people rolling down from the wooden ladders, and the roars of kill never ceased. The heart of the battle had always revolved around the vicinity of the group of sorcerer apprentices. In the midst of the bloodbath, a prospective sorcerer from the Cerubo family actually transformed into a giant evil eye, dragging 2 long and 3 short tentacles. He floated in the air 3 meters above the ground and brazenly charged down the castle wall to start massacre. The dazzling lightning that shot out from its strange vertical pupils obviously had a special paralyzing effect. All those who tried to get close to it would tremble violently the moment the violent electric current rolled past them. They would then watch helplessly as their flesh and blood were burnt into charcoal, unable to move an inch. As for those long-range and close-range attacks, they would be blocked by a translucent force field wall, unable to harm the evil eye in the slightest. Just this transformed quasi-sorcerer was enough to throw the entire attacking party into chaos. Left with no choice, a body refinement sorcerer from the Michelle family also roared and charged toward the evil eye. Both parties started an earth-shattering battle in front of the castle gate. Affected by this, the rest of the prospective sorcerers and high-level sorcerers also joined in the battle. Thus, the center of the battlefield became bigger and bigger, forcing both parties to stop temporarily in order to avoid the powerful wizard spells that were shooting out randomly. Seeing that the sorcerers on his side were unable to gain the upper hand, Viscount Terrace waved his hand furiously. More than 300 heavily armored infantrymen who had been on standby at the back stepped onto the battlefield with heavy footsteps. They formed a great steel wall and cooperated with the sorcerer apprentices on their side to continuously restrict the space of activity of the other party. As for the powerful wizard spells that the sorcerers cast by the sorcerers, they were all absorbed by the thick anti-magic shields in their hands, unable to cause the elemental damage that they should have. Even the explosive fireball released by a prospective sorcerer under the cover of his comrade only managed to blast 5 people into the air. Furthermore, after a short period of dizziness and recuperation, 3 of them actually stood up again and rejoined the team. An explosive fireball with an attack power of 40 degrees had only killed 2 mortal warriors? Such a result was undoubtedly hard to accept. And as the Iron Warriors approached, their team began to shoot out terrifying alchemy crossbow bolts. Each of these explosive arrows was worth 120 gold coins, and the explosive power of a single arrow was only 11 to 15 degrees. If they had too few of these things, they might not be able to do anything to the high-level apprentices and quasi-sorcerers who had defensive spells. However, if they were concentrated like rain, even the expressions of the 2 quasi-shamans from the Cerubo family would change slightly, and they would have to quickly change their positions. However, in addition to these iron cans that were hard to deal with, their enemies were also sorcerer apprentices that were of similar strength to them. Hence, with the continuous pressure from the Iron Warriors, the acolytes of the Cerubo family were clearly at a disadvantage. Their defeat was imminent. To be honest, if not for the magi of the family watching coldly from behind, this group of acolytes who cherished their lives would have long since retreated to the safety of the castle. But now, in order not to be punished by the sorcerers of the family, they could only grit their teeth and struggle to deal with the enemy. Grim quickly climbed up the city wall and silently arrived at Wizard Kogan's side. The nobles around Wizard Kogan all bowed and greeted him, but Grim didn't pay them any attention. "How is it?" A sinister smile emerged on Wizard Kogan's face. "What do you think of the battlefield in front of you?" "It's just a game." Grim's black eyes lit up with 2 balls of dark red flames. "That bastard Terrace is really generous. He even prepared something like explosive arrows for us. In just a short amount of time, he has already thrown out 30 to 40,000 gold coins." Viscount Tanner mumbled with a face full of hatred. However, the 2 wizards did not respond to him. They were still staring at the camp in the distance. When you step on the battlefield, they will bully you for being a newbie. They will definitely focus on you. Be careful. Wizard Kogan reminded Abel out of kindness. After going through the planar war together, they did not have too many conflicts of interest, so their relationship was a lot closer than before. "I'm just afraid they won't come." Grim smiled in a cool manner. "Oh right, I don't think there will be any punishment for killing an enemy wizard in a battlefield like this, right?" "Punishment?" Wizard Kogan laughed out loud. "In this scattered tower forest, our Cerubo family's foundation is much stronger than theirs." While they were talking, on the battlefield 100 meters away from the city wall, an elite wizard apprentice from the Cerubo family's defensive spell was suddenly blown into pieces by 3 explosive arrows. Just as he was trying his best to put up a new shield, an acid arrow flew towards him and stabbed into his right leg. Poof! The acid arrow exploded, and the terrifying acid splashed all over his body. Even his face was not spared. "Ah!" The elite wizard screamed in pain. He tried his best to dodge while gulping down healing potions. The eyes of a few elite wizard apprentices lit up, and they immediately chased after him. The Cerubo family's wizard apprentices kept retreating, and the team was in danger. "It's our turn." Wizard Kogan gently nodded towards Grim. His body was surrounded by black smoke, and he slowly floated into the air. Although the enemy wizard apprentices had the upper hand, 30% of their attention was still on the wizard on the city wall. Now that the enemy wizard had made a move, even though the fragrant prey was right in front of their mouths, they still quickly retreated without hesitation. Kogan's body was wrapped in thick black smoke, and he silently floated onto the battlefield. Along with a terrifying explosion of flames, Grimm's tall figure appeared beside the party of Yifeng's apprentices. Hearing the explosion, the wizard apprentices nervously held their magic wands and scrolls tightly. They looked like they were going to start a fight if they didn't agree with anything. When they saw that it was Wizard Grimm from their side, they let out a sigh of relief and bowed to greet him. "Take this. Go down and rest." Grimm casually threw out a health potion. The elite wizard apprentice who was hit by the acid arrow caught the potion and hurriedly bowed to thank Grimm. The explosion had not only broken his leg, but it had also severely disfigured his face. The potion he brought with him might be able to heal his skin after being corroded by the acid, but he could only think of another way to reattach his broken right leg. Now that he had this high-grade health potion, he would no longer need to ask for help to regrow his limbs. As the wizard apprentices supported each other and retreated back to the city wall, Wizard Grimm and Wizard Kogan began to slowly advance towards the enemy's camp, one in the sky and the other on the ground. As for the 300 heavy armored anti-magic infantry blocking in front of them, they did not even put them in their eyes. But in this world, there were always some idiots who didn't believe in superstitions. Seeing that the young wizard who was striding on the ground did not put up any defensive shield or defensive spells, under Viscount Terra's subtle hint, the steel-cast infantry phalanx suddenly shot out a concentrated burst of arrows. Their target was Grimm. Although he knew it was impossible to kill a wizard with these exploding arrows, as long as he could make his opponent's face dirty, he would be the first bargaining chip in this battle. The powerful Lord of War, Terrace. Looking at the terrifying, exploding arrows that were as dense as locusts, the members of the Cerubo family on the city wall immediately tensed up, quickly put up a defensive barrier. Quickly, at this moment, it was unknown how many people were screaming madly in their hearts. At this moment, under the gaze of tens of thousands of people, a flame rose up to the sky on the battlefield. In an instant, the tall and handsome young wizard's body was surrounded by flames, and the violent elemental flames immediately overturned his body. No, it wasn't that his body was overturned, but that his body was made of flames and lava. The extremely dense flames turned dark red, instantly outlining him into a humanoid dark red flame. Fire Wizard. Damn it, he's a fire wizard. Wizard Carlos, who had been hiding in the camp and observing, suddenly changed his expression. While Wizard Carlos was screaming, Grimm's body had already been enveloped by layers of high-temperature flames and terrifying streams of flames. The terrifying flame barrier had even shot out from his body and quickly extended to the edge of the battlefield. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The sound of something breaking through the air was endless. The moment the exploding arrow came into contact with the flame barrier, the body of the crossbow, which was made of fine steel, was scorched red by the terrifying high temperature. When the exploding arrows completely entered the flame barrier, the hot and soft body of the crossbow had already melted into a ball of molten iron before it could even get close to Grimm. As for the exploding spell circle on the body of the crossbow, before it could even be activated, it had already been destroyed along with the melting of the crossbow. Just like that, the sudden attack vanished into thin air. Lumps of glowing red molten iron were swept, pulled and blown away by the scorching and violent flow of flames. They fell onto the ground nearby and burned the black soil until green smoke rose in spirals. The raging flames swept out from Grimm's body, crazily ravaged every inch of land and every inch of space. The air was burning, the earth was burning, everything that could be burned was burning. Grimm's body expanded in the raging flames. A thick lava armor covered his torso and covered his face. A lava shield that was spitting out flames also appeared in the air, and began to circle around his tall and majestic body. The lava shield was made of thick and dense lava boulders. Red lava slowly flowed on top of it. Violent and ferocious burning flames and turbulent elemental flames lingered on top of it. Any living creature that got close to Grimm would be continuously attacked by the high temperature and flames. After Grimm had completed his flame demon transformation, he raised his burning face and stared at the retreating Iron Legion with his eyes as bright as the sun. "You want to leave after launching an attack? He. I'll let you experience the terror of a wizard." As soon as he finished speaking, Grimm raised his hands up high. His ferocious claws made of lava were surrounded by raging flames. In an instant, a large-scale spell was formed in his roar. Chapter 255. On the Battlefield. On the battlefield, where tens of thousands of people were watching, as Grimm, who looked like a terrifying fire demon, roared and cast a spell, the clear sky suddenly turned dark red. Above the clouds in the distance, a dazzling giant meteorite came crashing down with a terrifying fire cloud. Rolling flames, burning clouds of fire, and an indomitable and frightening might. Before the meteorite even got close, everyone on the battlefield already felt their hearts tighten and stopped breathing. They looked at the doomsday disaster falling towards the retreating Iron Legion with fear. "Idiot, he just wants to bait you into attacking. That way, he will have a reason to retaliate. Tell your people to run for their lives." After scolding the stupid leader, Wizard Carlos no longer bothered to hide his body. Green light flashed around his body, and he quickly rushed towards the battlefield as if he had been cast with a rapid movement spell. Old Wizard Kellen looked up at the falling meteorite and couldn't help but shake his head. Fire wizards are indeed the most suitable elemental wizards on the battlefield, especially one who has chosen to specialize in the fire element. Looks like it's going to be hard to save your group of tin cans. As soon as he finished speaking, Old Wizard Kellen raised his hand and quickly summoned a green wind bat. He sat on it and hurried towards the battlefield. As for the strange wizard who was shrouded in black fog, he had already turned into a black smoke and shot towards the battlefield like an arrow. Behind them, the arrogant Viscount Terrace's face turned pale and his teeth were clenched. Although he did not believe that the young sorcerer on the battlefield could destroy the Iron Legion that he had painstakingly built with one blow, the statements of the two sorcerers on his side made him feel nervous, and an ominous premonition arose spontaneously. The Iron Legion in front of him was the result of more than 10 years of hard work. When he was making the anti-magic armor for the Iron Legion, he had mixed in a lot of anti-magic materials. According to the market price of the Wizard Continent, a set of anti-magic armor like this would cost at least 4,000 gold coins. Meanwhile, the elite warriors who were equipped with anti-magic armor did indeed display powerful strength that matched their high price. The spells cast by ordinary apprentices would not be able to damage the anti-magic armor at all. Even advanced apprentices would have to retreat when faced with the combination of anti-magic armor and magic explosive arrows, not daring to face it head-on. On the battlefield just now, the Quasi-Wizard's bursting fireball only killed 2 heavy armor warriors was the greatest proof. Speaking seriously, the 2 dead heavy armor warriors had only died because their internal organs had been shattered by the violent flame shockwave and not because of witchcraft. From this, it could be seen that the magic resistance armor had a good ability to reduce the damage of magic spells. Therefore, when the 2 wizards lost confidence in the Iron Man army, Viscount Terrace held his breath and focused his attention on the terrifying meteor with a long fiery tail. Hence, under everyone's gazes, the terrifying meteorite finally landed heavily in the midst of the Iron Man Legion. Time seemed to have suddenly stopped flowing, and all the spectators' field of vision suddenly stopped. This short pause might only be a moment, but it could also be as long as a lifetime. A terrifying explosion finally broke the stagnation of time, displaying its ferocious and violent side in front of everyone. The earth was shaking, and the sky was bleeding. The falling meteorite with the fiery clouds in the sky left a huge crater with a radius of 20 meters. The violent impact caused the meteorite to shatter into pieces, and pieces of broken meteorite fragments shot out in all directions with terrifying power. After the scattering of the violent meteorite, there was a terrifying shockwave. The ear-piercing wind was like invisible blades, spreading out rapidly in a ring shape. Wherever the shockwave passed, the earth cracked, and gravel flew everywhere. All the dust and debris on the ground were thrown far away in an instant. After the terrifying shockwave passed, what followed was a sea of fire that could incinerate everything. The Iron Man army, which originally had 300 people, was smashed into the team by the terrifying meteorite falling from the sky. 7 to 8 people immediately disappeared into the deep crater, leaving no traces behind. When the meteorite rain ravaged the surroundings, apart from a small number of Iron Man warriors who died on the spot due to the meteorite fragments breaking their masks, most of them relied on their sturdy armor to survive. However, the terrifying shockwave that followed was too unsolvable. Under the impact of the violent and ferocious airwaves and wind blades, countless Iron Man warriors could not withstand the intense change in air pressure. Their eardrums were pierced, their eyes bloodshot, and their organs ruptured. They vomited large mouthfuls of blood after being blown to the ground by the violent airwaves. Then, just as they basically lost the ability to resist, the monstrous sea of fire descended. Most of the 300 Iron Man warriors were engulfed by the terrifying sea of fire without any resistance, and only those who were at the edge of the meteorite explosion managed to escape. Their bodies were still stained by the terrifying elemental flames, and they howled miserably as they were burned. They could only roll on the ground, hoping to extinguish the raging flames on their bodies. The center of the battlefield was immediately plunged into a bloodbath, and the scene before them was simply too horrible to look at. The horsewhip in Viscount Terrace's hand slipped silently. His eyes were dull, and his mouth was as wide as a hippopotamus. He only stared blankly at the battlefield that was filled with casualties, and he actually forgot to send people to treat the remaining warriors. 200 people. At least 200 people. The terrifying meteorite that fell from the sky had taken away at least 200 of the Iron Man army's elite warriors. At the edge of the monstrous fire, there were still many people on fire howling miserably as they ran around calling for help. They then fell to the ground in pain, never to get up again. Save, people. Terrace wanted to let out a thunderous roar, but he realized that his voice was weak and intermittent after he opened his mouth. Tears of pain rolled down from the corner of his eyes. It's over. It's over. The Iron Man army that he had painstakingly built was destroyed by a single attack from that terrifying Magus. Viscount Terrace's spirit collapsed in an instant, and he was like a mangy dog that had its spine removed, unable to sit still on his majestic horse. Kill him. You must kill him. Viscount Terrace roared madly in his heart and forced himself to stand up. He looked at the majestic and mighty figure that was like a fire demon through his blurry, teary eyes. A single violent attack had destroyed close to 70% of the Iron Man army's combat power. Grimm looked at the Iron Man army that was struggling in the sea of fire from afar. He did not try to attack again. According to the rules of war in the Scattered Tower Forest, wizards were not allowed to directly participate in worldly wars under normal circumstances. Wizards were only allowed to participate in wars when it concerned their personal or family interests, but they were still not allowed to take the initiative to attack nobles or their affiliated forces. Of course, those who took the initiative to provoke a sorcerer and offended the dignity of sorcerer would not be protected. Therefore, Grimm used a violent attack to respond to the Iron Man army's offense. This was something that no wizard had the right to interfere with. However, if his opponent had already paid a heavy price, and he was being aggressive, the Scattered Tower Forest Wizard Association would definitely not allow him to do this. Therefore, Grimm's 3-meter-tall body of flames stood still, silently waiting for his opponent to arrive. 200 meters to his left, Wizard Kogan slowly landed on the ground. He could not help but smile as he looked at the miserable state of the Iron Man army. Good burn, good burn, good burn. This time, the arrogant Lord Terrace is probably going to cry his heart out. Although the two wanted to fight side by side, as wizards, everyone had their own unique fighting style. Grimm's 100 meters wide fire barrier did not differentiate between friend and foe. Even if Kogan rushed in, he would still be burned. In order to avoid interfering with each other, the two could only maintain a distance of 200 meters. Both of them raised their heads at the same time and stared at the three wizards that were slowly landing 300 meters away from them. Carlos, Corin, my Ceylon. Kogan was obviously very familiar with the wizards from the big families and organizations around them. He only needed a glance at them to call out their names. Especially when his gaze landed on the strange black smoke, his tone became even more serious. Kogan had already contacted Grimm in secret and quickly explained the situation of the three people in front of him. Carlos, a rank 1 curse wizard, one of the elemental wizards, belongs to the Mikhail family, enemy. Cruel and vicious by nature, proficient in all negative curse spells. Corin, a rank 1 summoner, one of the arcane wizards, belongs to a neutral wizard association called the Wheel of Time, proficient in summoning creatures from another world. My Salon, a rank 1 dark wizard, one of the elemental wizards, belongs to the Black Hand Association, neutral, unknown personality, has an affinity with the dark element. All of her attacks have strong corrosive properties. After Kogan finished introducing them, Grimm could not help but ask, don't the scattered towers forbid wizards from interfering in worldly wars? Aren't they afraid of being punished by the Sorcerer Association by swaggering over? Oomph. Rules are dead, but people are alive. Kogan snorted. They must have signed some kind of contract with Terrace, so this war will affect their personal interests. That's why Kogan didn't continue, but Grimm already understood what was going on. He felt that the rules set by the Sorcerer Association were nothing more than a piece of cloth to cover up his embarrassment. The purpose of the laws was to prevent large-scale conflicts between sorcerers. No one would care about small-scale conflicts between families or clans. In the end, the war broke out because the surrounding wizard families and organizations saw the weakness of the Sarubo family and wanted to take advantage of them. It had nothing to do with justice, right or wrong. Even the reason for the war had been forgotten. Chapter 256. There were no declarations of war like the human nobles. There were no fake greetings either. After the two sides met face to face, a battle between magi immediately broke out. The old wizard named Corin raised his hand and gently drew in the air. Every time a strange glowing rune appeared in the air, a terrifying creature from another world would roar and step out of the void. Barb Lion, Dark Sound Monster, Ogre Wizard, Wyvern Dragon, Fermi Ant Worker Ant, Nighthound. Although they were not high-level creatures from another world, they still had the terrifying strength of a quasi-wizard. More importantly, their numbers seemed to be a little too much. These creatures from another world were bound by the power of witchcraft. As soon as they appeared, they quickly pounced towards Wizard Corgan. Wizard Corgan also revealed a ferocious smile and dashed towards them. Since the battle had already started, Grimm could not just sit back and do nothing. Grimm looked up at the two wizards who were coldly staring at him and let out a laugh. Using the summoner to stall Corgan, and then gathering the two attacking wizards to deal with me first? It had to be said that their calculations were quite accurate. However, whether their plan would succeed or not would depend on their own abilities. As Grimm took a big step forward, the battle between the three wizards immediately broke out. Carlos, who specialized in curses, quickly moved his body and kept himself outside of Grimm's terrifying flame barrier. As he muttered, he brandished a rotten, withered wooden club at Grimm. Black and gray cursed halos rained down on Grimm's head. Some of the cursed halos were destroyed by the terrifying flames as soon as they entered the flame barrier. Some of the cursed halos were intercepted by the rapidly rotating lava shield. Only a few of them managed to enter Grimm's body. Although there were only a few curses that could take effect, there was still an endless stream of them. Grim let out a muffled groan as he took a big step forward. His originally bright, red flame body suddenly dimmed a little. Obviously, he was affected by the power of the curse. Mental state, stamina loss, spatial disorder. Damn it, what kind of bastard witchcraft is this? Although the effects of these curses were not fatal, it was still a heavy burden for Grim, who was fighting against two enemies at the same time. If he were to be affected by the curse at a crucial moment in the battle, the consequences would be unimaginable. Grim roared angrily. The violent flame energy in his body suddenly swept out and instantly washed away the negative effects on his body. At the same time, a red light gathered in his eyes, and a terrifying ray of sunlight shot out, piercing Wizard Carlos's heart. Carlos, who had been drifting outside the flame barrier, let out a strange chuckle and instantly disappeared from his original position. At the same time, Wizard Mycelion, who had been standing still the whole time, also disappeared. Not good. It's a trap. Grim's pupils constricted, and he disappeared from where he stood. Boom! Grim reappeared 100 meters away. His tall and majestic body staggered 2 steps before he could stabilize himself. On the right side of his waist, there was a strange black smoke tightly wrapped around it. The dark red magma body that was originally hidden under the raging flames was revealed. It had been corroded by the black smoke and turned into a dark purple color. Elsewhere, Carlos and Mycelion silhouettes could be seen. Wizard Carlos' appearance was still considered normal. Other than some burn marks on the edge of his purple robe, everything else was still fine. However, the black smoke around Wizard Mycelion was a lot thinner, and the figure of a tall and thin wizard could be vaguely seen. At the edge of the black smoke, there seemed to be some tenacious little flames burning. Taking advantage of the gap when Grim was attacking, the two insidious wizards joined hands to launch a sneak attack. If Grim did not escape in time, he would have been in big trouble. Grim once again used his flame energy to extinguish the strange black smoke around his waist. However, he did not know what kind of spell that black smoke was, but it was so hard to extinguish. Left with no choice, Grim's sharp magma claws suddenly pierced into his wound and ruthlessly cut out the whole piece of magma. He then scooped up a big ball of sticky magma from the lava pool under his feet and covered his wound. During this time, the hateful Carlos once again quickly circled around Grim, continuously casting disgusting curses on him. Mycelion, on the other hand, sneered and turned into a strange black smoke. She randomly bumped around in the air, dodging Grim's meteor-like magma fireballs. Whenever the black smoke saw that Grim was unable to move, it would suddenly dive into the flame barrier and endure the burning elemental flames. It would inflict strange wounds on Grim's huge body by exchanging blows with the elemental flames. Almost all the parts that were corroded by the black smoke would lose their connection with Grim, becoming the best breakthrough point for Carlos' evil curse. Grim had only fought with them for a quarter of an hour, but he was already at a disadvantage due to their tacit cooperation. Grim secretly shook his head and sighed. As expected of a high-grade plane, the creatures there were far stronger than those in low-grade planes. Half a month ago, he was still slaughtering in the night plane, slaughtering grade 1 knights as if they were chickens. However, now that he had returned to the sorcerer world, he was facing the siege of 2 grade 1 sorcerers. Fire spells were indeed the most suitable elemental spell for slaughtering on the battlefield, but in small-scale battles between sorcerers, it still had its flaws. So what if a powerful fire spell could not hit its enemy? So what if a terrifying fire barrier could not trap its enemy? Against a terrifying sorcerer with the same agility and mobility, if he did not find a way to strengthen his abilities, Grim's previous advantage would disappear. Grim roared angrily. He finally decided to use his full strength. After throwing out a terrifying elemental crystal core, the Flame Lord stood up beside Grim. On the other side, the tall fire djinn emerged from the raging flames. At this point, this quasi-magus fire djinn could no longer serve as a qualified fighter. However, it could still be used for self-detonation, and it could be of some use. Apart from that, Grimm stretched out his right hand, and a flaming whip condensed from the pure power of flames instantly appeared. With this whip, it would no longer be easy for my Ceylon to break through Grimm's defenses. The secret voodoo scroll silently appeared in Grimm's left hand, which was covered in flames. It flipped through the pages on its own. There were no weaklings among the sorcerers present. The strange existence of the secret voodoo scroll caused Carlos and my Ceylon to frown. Soul equipment. This was definitely a soul equipment. However, all soul equipment had their own unique abilities, and it was difficult to determine what effect it had by looking at its appearance. If they made a mistake and allowed the fire wizard to seize the opportunity, this soul equipment alone would be enough to make them suffer. With this understanding, the two sorcerers could not help but slow down, and their attacks and defenses became more conservative. As a fire wizard, Grimm was undoubtedly an elemental wizard who was best at creating his own territory. As the three terrifying fire demons roared and attacked unscrupulously, a large part of the battlefield was transformed into a terrifying pool of black and red lava. There were fewer and fewer safe places for the two sorcerers to stand on. A few elite acolytes from the Salubo family perched on top of the castle walls, their souls trembling as they watched the sorcerer's battlefield. If the previous battle between acolytes was considered intense, then the current battle between sorcerers was like a giant volcano had suddenly been shoved into the battlefield. Fierce flames and violent spells rampaged about, and the landscape around Rocker Castle had been severely altered. Even though they were a kilometer away from the battlefield, they could still feel the terrifying heat and the wind pressure pressing down on them. Loud booms rang out incessantly. Whenever a terrifying spell burst forth from the center of the battlefield, everyone's heart would stop for a moment. They were afraid that the sorcerers would get too excited, and if they were not careful, they would be wiped out along with the castle behind them. As for whether the terrifying Wizard Grimm was the most powerful sorcerer, they did not know. However, they knew that Wizard Grimm was definitely the most terrifying. On the ground, there was a large pool of lava, and in the sky, there were layers of black and red fire clouds. Between the sky and the earth, there was a world of raging flames. This terrifying Wizard Grimm, with his own strength, had turned this place into his own territory. To the mortals of the world, to the future sorcerers like them, he displayed the terror of a powerful sorcerer in an almost insane manner. The terrifying, destructive power of a powerful sorcerer was displayed incisively by him, and it was daunting. At the end of the battle, the whole battlefield was a sea of fire. Even the two prospective sorcerers could not see the progress of the battle from the surging waves of elements. When the whole battlefield had turned into a sea of fire, Grimm's full power was finally unleashed. His elusive flame jump, coupled with his fast running in the sea of fire, no longer had the chronic disease that limited his speed. The violent and ferocious fire element spell gave him unparalleled, long-range destructive capabilities. Even a lava fireball that he casually released had terrifying power. His powerful Balrog body had doubled his vitality. With a vitality of 7, he was almost at the level of a physique refinement sorcerer. This also meant that he had both a terrifying long-range attack ability and a decent close combat ability. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.